Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are up to the 16th film in our James Bond Retrospective series with 1989's License to Kill, directed for the final time by John Glenn. I believe 5 Bond films under his belt, and this is the final one. And that's kind of a running theme through this review. We say it's kind of like an end of an era Bond film is very much how I think a lot of people view it before we move into next week's. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're here for Dalton's final one. So chief among them, 2 films and done. We say goodbye to another Bond after only 2 weeks. There's other actors, there's screenwriters, opening title creators, a lot of people's final film with this one, long-serving cast and crew and very short-serving in terms of Dalton. And once again, we are joined with the SpyHards podcast. We've got Scott and Cam. Back by popular demand. I think your guys' last one was Man with a Golden Gun, wasn't it, I think? And we felt kind of bad for that one because, you know, we were kind of middle of the road on that one, middle of the road to negative, and we wanted to open it up to you guys and, you know, give you guys carte blanche as to which one you wanted to come back on. You said License to Kill, and here we are. I mean, the weeks have just flown by, at least for us, doing these week to week. But no, it's great to have you guys on. I think perfect film to talk about.
Bless your heart.
Yes. Oh, we'll get onto him later. Absolutely.
I don't know where to go from there. Let's go for this. We know this is the one everyone wants, like License to Kill. It's had an incredible reputation online over the years, and let's open up, shall we? We're obviously pre-recording this, but I can only imagine what the chat at the side is like at the moment. The Dalton fans have been waiting patiently for this week. Of course, comment along if you haven't seen our other videos. If you're new to it, this is of course our James Bond Retrospective series. We're bit leading up to No Time to Die, and I say that slightly hesitant. September 30th, fingers crossed. I've remained optimistic, whether my tone says that or not. But join us weekly, fingers crossed, until we get a fluent release. But obviously, if you are new, hit that subscribe. As we said, this is the Dalton films done. We've done more. We've done Lazenby. We've done Connery, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's right at the bottom of the list. I don't care. Next week is Pierce Brosnan, guys. It's Goldeneye, so we'll be able to get to that next week. But as we said, we are here talking License to Kill, so we're not going to bring up Brosnan too much today. I do promise you all that. But as we always say, if you are also new to our channel, hit us up on our social medias where we announce sort of our videos, who's going to be joining us on the next ones. We'll announce that at the end of today's video, who's going to join us for Goldeneye. That's Facebook Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and we're on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy. So check us up on there. But as we said, we're here for License to Kill, and I don't even know how to. Let's do something normal, because we know it's the first time you're viewing it, but let's open it to Scott and Cam. Do you guys remember the first time you saw this film? Because I'm very intrigued to see if everyone's got their own story, because I think we actually could today.
I mean, I haven't really got much of a story with it. I didn't really watch the Dalton films until I decided to go back and watch all the Bonds in a row. A few years back, and I live texted Cam the whole way through. And I just remember saying I really enjoyed the Dalton films, specifically this one. And it really jumped out at me as one. It reminded me a lot of 80s films that I really liked, 80s action films. And it stuck in my mind. And it has, for a long time, just remained in my sort of top 5 Bonds.
For me, so once I discovered Bond through View to a Kill, that was the one my parents showed me first. What a weird way into the franchise, but that's what my parents decided was the perfect launch point. But then it just became a game of, like, my sister and I had no understanding of continuity, which movie came at what place. So it would be more like we'd go to the video store and my parents would rent us one. So we saw all the Moors sort of out of order, and License to Kill was sort of in kind of line. Once we finished the Moors, we did Living Daylights. Then we later did License to Kill. And I remember at the time, it greatly grabbed my imagination with all the shark stuff and the electric eel. Like, that was enough to make, like, 12-year-old Cam ecstatic. So it was one that I enjoyed very much when I was young.
Yeah, I think your parents clearly knew that Christopher Walken was the way forward, so start him off on View to a Kill. I have no problems with them choosing that one for your first Bond film. That was a great Bond film, in my opinion. Yeah, and that's kind of like a similar thing to what some other people we've had on the show have said, that when they were watching Bond, they would go randomly. Like, they would have no sense of continuity. They wouldn't follow it in order. Obviously, we're doing it for this retrospective, and I have kind of jumped around myself. You know, I started at the Craig ones, and then I kind of went all the way back to Connery and did watch them partially all the way in order, and then now doing it fully this time. So, but I think with this one in particular for me, obviously this was my first time watching it for this, but its reputation kind of preceded it. And pretty much like the word of mouth over the subsequent weeks that we've done all of the reviews so far. George, you yourself keep saying that License to Kill is the one. And also it's mostly down to the theme for me, like Gladys Knight's theme. We'll talk about the music later. That's probably one of my favorites, certainly in the Bond, just like the Bond themes. It's easily one of my favorites. So just knowing that I love the music, discovering the Patti LaBelle song a few weeks ago, which is the end credits song, loving that as well. And just loving 80s movies and kind of hearing on the grapevine that this is more of just an 80s action film that Bond happens to be in. And I think, honestly, that's the perfect way to describe this film. It's very much a standalone one. So last week when we did Living Daylights, that was very much an introductory piece for me as, okay, let's see what Dalton's all about. Because I'd seen nothing of his Bond. I didn't know what to expect. That set the stage. And it was like, okay, let's get on to License to Kill now. So there was a lot of hype going into this one, and sometimes going into a film with a lot of hype can be very damning, because if it doesn't live up to that, even like one moniker of like excitement for it, the whole thing could come crashing down. Opening opinions, though, I can safely say this is probably one of my favorite Bond films. I do view it kind of in the same way that you would with On Her Majesty's Secret Service, very much a standalone film. But so very different, even though he did two, so very different to Living Daylights. And I'm going to try and not compare it to that film so much, because I want to review this film on its own merits. But just for like the sake of an opening argument, I think Living Daylights feels more of a Bond film, and if like the usual box tick of like all the ingredients of what you expect from one. And I can understand why maybe this film would turn a lot of people off if people don't like this, if they don't view it as a very Bond-like film. I completely understand that. But as I mentioned, I love my hard-boiled 80s action movies, so this was kind of a breath of fresh air for me with this one. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I want to say this is sort of the Bond films, similar to what you said, Scott. When I was watching them, over here, ITV, right? Weekends, Sundays. I think a lot of people say about the weeknights, which I never knew about. But this one was never on because it was rated 15. So I went through many years. I'd seen Living Daylights. I'd seen so many of them out of order on TV. So once I got that box set behind me for the anniversary when it was released, that was the first time I saw License to Kill. And I don't know how to describe it. It was the last film I saw first, if that makes sense. That was, at that point I'd seen all of the others, and doing them in order again. I've obviously seen all the Brosnans and Craigs, and so I knew that License to Kill I didn't know anything about. And if anyone ever had the missed pleasure of playing 007 Legends in 2012, if anyone heard of that game, obviously the Dalton level is there as well. And it was very weird timing that I played that level before I saw the film. Don't ask about how that came to be, but it was a really fun experience, because obviously the hype on the 50th anniversary year to me was unparalleled, and I'll speak about that a lot more in the Skyfall review. But watching License to Kill, because obviously back then social media is a thing, but it's not, we don't do stuff like this. I don't know that many of the Bond fans, so when I watched License to Kill, I was like, that was really good. And I was 16, started to study film around the same time, and I was like, it's really good, and no one speaks about it. Then over the years, you see Facebook pages full of Bond fans, and Dalton this, and obviously doing these videos for a lot more Dalton fans, and it's lovely to see that I'm not in a minority, because I think this is one that the I don't want to say the common fan, that sounds horrible, but the average cinema goer, maybe that's a better term, probably wouldn't speak about License to Kill, because it's not the one that people talk about often that aren't Bond fans. And I think that's a really interesting approach to the film. But I absolutely adore it. And again, rewatching it now, especially after the last few months, and I've had everyone spin out footage, so I was like, are people overhyping it? No, they are not. This is incredible. And I'm very excited to see where this will be come doing the rankings in the next couple of months, because this is like the top tier. Like there's, with the Bond films, you get good ones, great ones, but there's definitely an elite top tier where there's very few films. And this is a worthy place in that. That's my opening thoughts as well. But I don't even know how to follow that up in absolute truth. Where shall we start? Shall we start with a big thing? I mean, we don't normally drop stats and stuff, but I'd say this is pretty important for the history of Bond. This was the first Bond film to be completely 100% shot outside of England, which is impressive given the fact that it is film number 16. But also at the same time, it's kind of sad because obviously Bond is the illustrious British film industry film. So it's one of those where it's always interesting reading stuff like that. And when I've seen behind the scenes videos that, you know, the whole thing where it was filmed, a lot of it in Mexico as well, it kind of worked. Like, you don't not notice it, if that makes sense. Like, because the Bond films are so global as a franchise, I don't notice it like, oh, this didn't shoot at Pinewood. Like, well, I wouldn't know by the set decorations. It doesn't look bad and whatnot, but it's not that noticeable because it works what the film's trying to do.
I mean, from my knowledge, it was a money-saving exercise to move it to Mexico. And you do get the obligatory sort of M and Moneypenny scene in a fake office that I imagine was probably filmed in Mexico too, that's set in London. So you do get that connection, but I don't think I miss it. I don't need it to be set in the UK. And you still and you get different scenarios in different places as well. It still travels. You still get that sort of travel log feeling. It doesn't go from place to place. So I think it ticks all the boxes still.
Yeah, I agree with Scott in that, I mean, it's a globe hopping franchise. So every movie is dependent on the locations they're going to. And obviously here we're visiting the wonderful land of Isthmus, which I think we've all genuinely enjoyed vacations to at certain points in our lives.
I'm here right now.
Merry Isthmus, Scott. But for me, this one, like, in terms of location, it all works. It doesn't bother me that they're not shooting in the UK. There is a nice little hint of tradition when they're always shooting at Pinewood, you know, on the 007 stage. That's more of a film geek thing to really care about, though. And as, you know, Scott mentioned, it was somewhat of a cost-cutting thing. And honestly, it's kind of good they kept their costs low, because this one didn't perform particularly well at the box office. It opened in the bloodbath summer of 1989. You know, back in the days, it wasn't a new movie every single weekend the way it is now, or sometimes 2 movies a weekend. Back then, a movie would play for like, 2 months straight. And it opened the summer of like Batman, Ghostbusters 2, Star Trek 5, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So we just got completely swallowed up. So I think the Mexican location probably worked well for it. In terms of the aesthetic of the movie, though, I think this one, it's not something that takes me out of the movie, but it has a more about like a stripped down look to it. Like, there's a certain visual grandeur to a lot of the Bond films that this one doesn't have, but that also feeds into kind of what the movie is at its heart anyway. So it doesn't particularly bother me, but it is something I think if you were someone who had more of a casual understanding of Bond, who just showed up for the stunts and the, kind of the tropes of the genre, you would sit through this one and maybe be like, that felt weird. And you might not be able to put your finger on why. You may walk out just being like, I didn't like that one. It was weird. But it does have a different kind of sensibility about it.
Yeah, and in terms of visuals, I do think it's more refined than the 2 films that I'm going to mention, but going back to the early Moore films with Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun, how you talk about that visual look to it, and I think we had a few commenters mentioning, actually, it might have been you guys mentioned it, like the sleazy look to it. It's like the 70s sleaze to it. When you watch those films, and you kind of want to take a shower after watching them, because it's just like, ew, like... And it's kind of like the 80s equivalent of that. I do think, just like from directorially and cinematically, this is much better than those 2 that I just mentioned. But that same kind of feel to it, I think it just goes to that like gritty, criminal underbelly kind of feel to it that those previous 2 films had. But yeah, in terms of the locations, I think Pinewood, they just used Pinewood for post-production and sound mixing or sound editing or something. I think they were the only 2 things that they did at Pinewood for this particular film. And yeah, it doesn't really bother me, because you watch this film, and I've watched this film twice now, actually, in lead up for this. But when you watch the film, like, it doesn't sort of take me out of it that they don't go to London, or there's not loads of British stuff in there. Like, does that really serve the story? And it's like, well, if they just crowbarred a scene in where he goes to London to, reconvene with M or Moneypenny or whatever, and then come back, it's a lot of fluff, and it doesn't need to be in there. And what I appreciate about this film the most is just how stripped back it feels. It's such a simple premise. And actually, I think it was based on like a few films. I think quite a few films have done this, where you have your protagonist who infiltrates the antagonists, and it's like a inside sabotage kind of operation. There's actually a lot of, watching this film, you can see where so many films have gained inspiration from either certain scenes, set pieces, or certain story elements. Tenet being, Nolan loves his Bond films, right? And there's actually 2 moments from a Nolan film that sort of came to mind with this, but with Tenet, where you have literally the protagonist, because he doesn't have a name in that film, with Kenneth Branagh's character, and he's gaining his trust, and he's running an operation in tandem with that. I think there's films like Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars as well, which I think were inspirations for this particular film. It just works. It's that really simple premise, which I always kind of crave with a Bond film. I don't know if it's my mentality or me getting older year by year. I'm just like, you just keep it nice and simple. And this one's nice and simple. It tells the story that it needs to do, but with that really hard edge to it. I don't know if we want to talk about the rating just yet, because I know that this is going to play into when we actually talk about Dalton and how it fits his character. But I actually kind of love that this one's a 15 or R-rated. Like it just works for the film. I think if you hadn't have gone that far with it as this film does in certain places, I don't think you would have had like the power of the story, and I don't think the villain would have been able to hit the heights that he does. I'm getting ahead. I don't want to talk about the villain too much, but I love the tone and the feel of this film. And I'm actually really surprised at the producers and everyone for going this far with it. For having the confidence in Dalton's take on Bond and realizing pretty much either during or after Living Daylights that they need to go more mature with this one. It's, now is the time for a more mature Bond. And they go crazy with it. Now, it'd be interesting if they had have done a third Dalton film. Would they have continued this tone, or would they have looked at the box office and gone, we need to go more of a back to basics, more of a family feel to it? It's all conjecture at this moment because we never got a third Dalton film, but we do see that eventually when we move into Brosnan, where it feels very much like a return to form, and they don't maintain that more mature edge probably until the Craig films, I think.
Yeah, it's a really good time to talk about the sort of the rating, actually, because I'm going to jump in with something. I think I said this on Fiores Only. Obviously, John Glenn, he did 5 films, and I can't remember if I said it word for word, but when I watched Fiores Only, it's been the first time in a very long time, I don't like that film, and I still like that film, so no one's going to try and convince me otherwise in the comments. And I said, I'm going to be more blunt now because we're on the License to Kill. Maybe this can be our edgy discussion. Fiores Only is a crap version of License to Kill, and that's my honest belief with it. And when I rewatched that recently, I was like, it's the Vendetta Bond. It's Bond on a personal note, and all these sort of interactions. And I kind of came out thinking, I can't wait to watch License to Kill because this is it done properly. And I mentioned that I don't think Roger Moore worked for that, and I kind of said that I always felt that John Glenn was waiting for a Timothy Dalton type character. And when you get this film, to me, I know it's his final film, which is a shame because I'd have been so intrigued to see if they did another one. But what they choose to do with that tone that makes the villain, and I think it benefits Dalton's portrayal of Bond as well, that he is a bit like more hard than some other ones. We say this, but you can say about any Bond switcher, a lot of them. I can't see XYZ doing XYZ. I personally, bar maybe Craig, I can't see any of the other 4 doing a License to Kill. Connery would if it wasn't called James Bond, if you wanted to do an 80s action film. And it's a really interesting talking point with this one that it was the one rated 15. And I love those, not like the drug trafficking films, but when you get those 80s, the action star franchise, right? And it's the Stallones, it's the Schwarzeneggers, it's the man on the mission. The idea to place Bond and the elements of Bond within it, because you still get the spice of the infiltration, we get Q, we get a lot of other things, but to take them and apply it into that era, it's a really fascinating, unique experience. And I think the rating helps that big time because I think it opened up the door to a bit more freedom for the crew and what they wanted to try and do with the film. And we'll talk about some of the stunts later on and stuff, but I think the whole thing worked more beneficial. And jumping back to Dalton and the Fiores Only thing, when you had Roger Moore kicking the car off the cliff, it felt so unlike Roger Moore. And when we spoke in View to Kill, when he said that he didn't enjoy the scene of the massacre from Zorin, and I was like, well, wait till we get to the next couple of films, see how their villains treat certain people. And I love the fact that the approach, and I know it's sort of an overview, but the Dalton era, specifically this film, was so different to what we had before. It makes it stand up, but the fact it's a standalone, not even adventure, mission for Timothy Dalton is just so well done. And I've got fair play to them because it was a very ballsy thing to do with the James Bond franchise. That kind of decision on that magnitude is probably not something that was done lightly. And I know it's a bit easier to do that with nowadays, obviously with the Craig era, the post 9/11 sort of the films we were getting and whatnot. It's a lot easier to do that kind of tone. But in the 80s on the Spy franchise, I think it's a very hard thing to do. And I think by approaching it with that first, before you bring in the other elements, I think that does make a difference and it makes it stand alone.
I think they dipped their toes in the water with The Living Daylights. They wanted to do something with a bit more edge. And I'm surprised they pulled the trigger on this, looking back on it, because you think it's such an unsure thing that it was not the safe bet. The safe bet was to write another generic Bond film. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of The Living Daylights. Sorry, fans out there. But that's my feelings on it. So taking that risk and rolling the dice it didn't pay off. Let's be honest. Retrospectively, it didn't pay off. But I'm glad they tried. I'm glad they tried to reinvent Bond going into the next decade, because in their mind, they were going to do more Timothy Dalton films, and they wanted to have this edge on him and make him his own Bond. Whereas, Moore was his own Bond, Connery was his own Bond, Lazenby didn't really get his chance to become a Bond, and they needed to define their Bond, and this was their angle at doing so. So I'm glad they rolled the dice, and I think it's given us a very interesting film, because a lot of Bond films can be very prescriptive. And some fans turn up for that prescriptive approach. And if it isn't following that exact, Bond girl explosion, blah, 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 they don't like it. And that's why I think people didn't turn up for this film, one of the reasons why. But I'm glad they rolled the dice.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that they often will retreat back to that safe template when they get scared. But like The Living Daylights was a decent hit. And one thing I find interesting about Dalton is when you look at the other actors who played Bond, their first movie out is usually really good and nails them, like what they are going to bring to the character. I feel like Dalton's the only one where they were a little unsure. And I like Living Daylights, but it feels a little more of pulling a lot from the past while still trying to figure out who Dalton was as a performer. Whereas this one, it feels like we understand who Dalton is and we are going to write to that. And so often when you watch interviews, Dalton will say, I kept telling them, I want to go back to Fleming. And that was very important to him. And frankly, everything I've heard from Dalton, he was not a guy who was like, I want to do 7 of these. I want this to be my career. He was showing up and he was like, I want to make the best possible one. And if I do another one, I don't care. Like, maybe we'll see. He wasn't a guy who was like signing up for like the career as James Bond. He was wanting to make really good movies when he could. And with this one, it just feels like his influence was much stronger. And I always felt like Living Daylights kind of walked this line between trying to bring new things in, making a more monogamous Bond, things like that, but also throwing in goofy stuff that just felt tonally weird. And this one feels like they strip back a lot of that. There's still moments that are over the top 80s action stuff, but it's so much driven by this ruthless drive of Bond. And, we'll talk about the villain later, but there's a lot of just psychological stuff going on with that villain. You do not get that in the villains in The Living Daylights or any of the Roger Moore films. Like, Stromberg is not bringing a lot of complexity to the table. You know what I mean? You could write an essay on the character of Sanchez in this movie. So it just feels like what Dalton wanted to do was mature is the word we use, but it's also like, I want to speak to adults as well. Like, I don't want this just to be a kid-friendly franchise, which maybe was wrong. Like, maybe they learned a lesson that the world wasn't ready for this. They would be, but I think you need this movie to test the waters, maybe financially struggle, but to pave the way essentially for what we will come back to with the Daniel Craig era. I don't know that the Daniel Craig era starts as confidently if you don't have a movie like this testing the waters first.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is very much a precursor to eventually what we would get, and audiences seem to be quite set on the sort of more modern, mature take on Bond. And we have had, over a decade of that now, so maybe audiences will want something different when we get to the next Bond following Craig. But I do think this was a really important film to know that we can take Bond in this direction. We can go as far with the character in this. And I know we need to talk about the pre-credit scene, but I'll just sort of say this on Dalton. I know we're going to cycle back to him, that I have so much respect for him that I think he's the only actor to have read all or at least most of the Ian Fleming books. Like, he knew that character. And I've always viewed Dalton similar to what you just said, Cam, where he was more of an actor than he was a movie star. And I don't want to say that's like an underhanded comment to, like Connery or Moore or anything, because they are fantastic actors, but yeah, he wouldn't want, and that's precisely the reason they didn't get him back for GoldenEye, was that they wanted to sign him up for a multi-picture deal, and he was like, no, I'll sort of jump in if I think the material's good enough, which is, testament to him as an actor and fair play to him for that. But that's scary to a movie studio, and that was scary to them, when Moore did that as well towards the end of his contract, where he was on a picture-by-picture deal. that scared them, and they wanted to lock someone down for like multiple films. And don't want to talk too much about Living Daylights, but we mentioned last week, I think, that felt like a transitionary film, and it was a solid transitionary film, but the elements where they were still going back to kind of like the more like stuff with the quips and the comedy, those were all the scenes that I just kind of reviled against in that film, and they stuck out like a sore thumb. Love them in the Roger Moore films, love them in the Connery films, but they didn't have a place tonally in that film, and it felt like a film that was very much at odds with itself in terms of its tone. This was consistent, like everything was locked down, the script, the story, acting, take on the characters, everything was just firing on all cylinders with this one for me. So with that being said, I think we should dive into the film now. We will come back to Dalton in just a second, because I do think there's more to say about him. But the pre-credits scene, right off the bat, the music, like this sets the tone. Like this is dark. This isn't the gun barrel music you expect. Like this is some dark stuff going into it. It does go into the Bond theme afterwards, but it's quite jarring at first. It kind of like immediately holds your attention to it. Now, it has to be this film. Nikolai will be watching this. As we mentioned, we're pre-recording this right now. Nikolai will probably be watching right now. This has been like a running thing on these retrospectives where all the way back since on Her Majesty's Secret Service, he mentioned that he sees a film as a spiritual successor to that film. Now, I've probably mentioned about 3 times trying to guess which film it has, and there's been loads of moments where there's been references, subtle little sentences here and there in subsequent Bond films that have referenced On Her Majesty's. I'm like, is it this one you're talking about? Is this the spiritual successor? This one has to be, right? Just in terms of it being a revenge film, which I know was the original concept for the sequel that never happened with Lazenby. It was going to be a direct sequel, all out for revenge after the death of Tracy. And thematically, I think this is kind of a spiritual successor in that, and the fact that she does get referenced. I love that the whole wedding with Felix is the whole precursor to this thing, and I love my opening sequences that are like a random Bond mission where he's on a completely disconnected mission and it's full of action and spectacle and fun. Love all that stuff, but I also do like the pre-credit scenes that are intrinsically tied into the plot, and it makes it feel like a complete whole. And that's what you get with this one. I think that was the right decision. Sanchez is just built up so well at the beginning, just from word of mouth, the fact that he's this hardened criminal that the FBI have been tracking down for years, trying to get him, and they finally get him. And this was when I mentioned that I can see a lot of modern films taking inspiration from this, capturing, and then he eventually gets out. You've had that with the Joker in The Dark Knight, but the one that I was kind of struck with the most was Mission Impossible Fallout, where they tip the armored car into the water and it floods and they get him out. So it's always interesting going back to earlier films like this. Obviously, I've seen Fallout more times than I have this film, but going back and going, that's probably where they dipped into maybe some of these older Bond films. But I think it's a tremendous opening. I don't think it's like up there in terms of the crazy spectacle as some that you've had in the Bond franchise, but just in terms of a solid opening, when the Bond theme kicks in and the two are like dropping out of the helicopter and he's being rappelled down, it's just epic. And the shot of them both parachuting at the end, even with an old Felix, I'm fine with it. It is weird that they went back to the old actor, though. We'll probably mention that when we come to him. But I think it's a good opening sequence. It sets up all the characters, the situation, everything's where it needs to be. It's just a really tightly written film.
I really enjoyed this opening credits, but I've got this sort of weird perplexity with it that so many Bond sequences, they're either not connected to the plot, or they can be, or it's this happened and we'll come to it later on down the line. And this has actually had a humongous moment of importance. But this is one of the very, very few, if any, sequences where I feel that, I don't want them to play the music first, but you could play the theme and start the film with this because it is so sequentially perfect for what we get after. It still works as a pre-credit sequence, absolutely. You get your great stunt. That still works as a short story that Felix gets to go to his wedding still and all that kind of stuff. In fact, I saw in a video that he injured his leg on the parachute coming down and he actually had to limp for the rest of production, which fits what happens to come. I'm sure he can't take blame and then says, it was my idea to have the leg bitten off by a shark. But I really enjoy the opening sequence, and I always, the first time I saw this, as I mentioned, 2012, big film from that year. Sorry, Chris, Dark Knight Rises. Obviously, had the scene of Scotland with the bigger plane and all that. And when I remember watching License to Kill, I was like, oh my God, it's like the Dark Knight Rises. At that point, I'm really into my film to Nolan. So I was like, I wonder if he's inspired. But it's great seeing the stunts and the fact that Dalton was doing this as well, that you can see it's him. And I know it's, it's easy to say it's 1989 and Roger Moore was on in his later film, but the fact that you know that's the actor doing those stunts, it just adds something to it. And bringing it Mission Impossible again, that, when you look about how incredible the stunts have been, and they are, and the big selling point of those stunts now is not the stunt themselves, but it's Tom Cruise doing them. Whereas in this, it's like, I know Dalton can't do every stunt, and I know that, I think Cubby Broccoli found out, was annoyed on set that it wasn't the stunt double, but it just adds another level, I think, to the performance, to the character, and watching the film. And especially when this is I don't want to say this is a grounded and real film, but it feels the most realistic of many Bond films in terms of motives, in terms of villain plans. It's a drug action film. Things like that probably happened to a point, not obviously the level of it doing it, but I thought the opening sequence is a great way to introduce Sanchez, to bring him into it. We get a couple of the supporting characters given their moments as they come in down the line, and of course we get the wedding setup, which is a very interesting plot point for the way the film looks. But it's a solid pre-credit, not one of my favorites, but only because I think it honestly feels like the first 15 minutes for the film to then pause for the song.
I actually really agree with you on that one, George. I think you could just play the music before and it would be absolutely fine. And it's a fine opener. It's probably not one of my favorites. It's probably middle of the road for a Bond opening. But what I really do like about it is, and this is something you don't get enough of in Bond, is there's other competent people in the universe. Even Felix is competent in this scene. He's not bumbling his way through like Jack Lord. He actually is taking on Sanchez. He's running around with an M16 looking like a badass and then gets married at the end. How badass is that? I'm all for people being competent other than Bond. And so seeing, all that stuff in the helicopter, and it's great. I liked that. But apart from that, I don't think it really stands out much for me.
It does have the maybe the lamest looking Bond moment, though, where he's like in the harness and he's going to lower him. That always makes me laugh. But it does two things, I think, really effectively. One, the stunt sequence, which totally inspiration for Dark Knight Rises there at the start, is really cool. And it felt like something we hadn't seen before, which in a franchise filled with stunt sequences, I give them props whenever they can do something I haven't seen before. And it looks real, and it was real, and it looks just incredible. It also has something, though, that I remember really jumped out to me the first time I saw it when I was young. And that's the moment where we are introduced just to Sanchez in this, where he shows up and Lupe, his girlfriend, is with this other guy. And I remember, classic Bond opening. There's your villain. And then he's like, cut this guy's heart out. And I remember that literally just being like, this didn't happen. Like, Christopher Walken wasn't doing things like this. And then he starts whipping her. And it's like, it establishes us right away that this is an incredibly dangerous character, and it's not something that we're used to seeing in a Bond film. You can look at a character like Red Grant, in From Russia with Love, who's obviously very deadly, but you don't get a dark take on him like this, where right away up front you're seeing that like your villain is not a fun villain. He's a genuinely mean and nasty character, and even his henchman, Benicio del Toro, doesn't seem to have some sort of cartoonish gimmick we can have fun with, like Jaws or Odd Job. It's just, wow, like these are really scary guys. And so it makes Bond capturing them, I think, very effective, because it's like, okay, cool, he captured them. But you also know, just based off that opening, this is going to fuel the movie, because those guys aren't going down without a fight.
Yeah, and, we'll talk about the villains in full later, but just realistic, like people exist in the world today like this who do things such as this and much, much worse. So he's definitely the most realistic set of villains I think we've had. Definitely main villain as well. And because of that, I don't know how memorable Sanchez is in the Bond community. As I say, like I'm still very new. I'm still a fledgling in the Bond community. So I don't know who are the most popular characters. I know a lot of people mention him, probably just from the performance and how hard-hitting his character is, but I think people do remember the more theatrical, campy villains just because, they're campy by nature and they're fun and they're memorable that way. This one is just like almost a mirror as to people that exist out there, which, is great. It's a bold new direction, but it's also kind of terrifying as well. The last thing that I'll say on the opening titles, actually, I don't know if this happened. I think this might be a line after the pre-credit scene, but this sets the stage for Bond's character as well with Dalton. and why he's on this mission as well, why he gets so rolled up. One of my favorite quotes in the film was, he was married once, but it was a long time ago. I always love my references to Honor Majesties. Actually, watching them in order, there's been quite a few references to that film. They always kind of go back to that one, and it's I think it's a very important film for Bond as a character and like a part of his canon and his character that they've just ran with, with however many recastings Bond's had at that point. And it's just so perfect. I always get a kick out of the references to that film. And I think it's perfect to reference that film specifically as well. Because if we get onto Bond himself now being Dalton's final one, I love that this is a revenge film, as I mentioned, and kind of like the original idea of what the sequel would have been to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Because we've seen in the previous film with him how much love and camaraderie he has for his fellow agents. We see that in Living Daylights, where after his colleague gets killed, was it Saunders, I think his name is, with the automatic door. When one of my favorite moments from that film, when he grabs the balloon and he just like crushes it in his hands, and you can see, how much he does have reverence for his fellow agents in the field. And if one of them gets killed, it then becomes personal. So we see that when Felix gets maimed in this film, but also I think probably the biggest catalyst, not just for him, it's also a personal retribution for him to get revenge when the same situation happened to him ages ago with his dead wife. So I love that as an immediate setup for Dalton. And although he only did 2 films, this film feels complete enough, especially when you get to the end, that he ends on a high note and it kind of hits all the beats between his 2 Bond films. I think you have the more Bond-like film with the Living Daylights, in that it's the box-ticking one. It feels more akin to a Bond film. But this goes in a whole other direction as well. We get more of that drama with the character. So between his 2 films, he kind of covers everything. But I like that they went in this direction as the setup for the mission that he goes on.
Yeah, you mentioned spiritual successor, which is a great term, because when you really strip it down in this one, obviously, his best friend he's not dead, but he's been dipped into the shadow, and his wife is murdered on the wedding day. Obviously, we know Bond's wife was murdered on the wedding. It's essentially we're kind of doing this, but via your friend. And it's a really smart way for them to take the approach, because, yes, it's not his wife, but one of the things I think I joked about you the other day, Chris, was that when they've got the scenes, they feel like the 3 of them are a bit closer than one would think for a couple that are about to get married. And there's a couple of questionable lines and moments in there and things like that. It's really funny, but I'm fine with it. And it does make me think that I take this with the approach that in theory that could have been Tracy, right? And it wouldn't have changed anything, the stakes, the way the film works, because Bond is as responsible for capturing Sanchez as the others. And I love the dynamic, but it doesn't sort of sit there and pry on, Felix, this is, well, we obviously get a great night at the end, but every 2 minutes it could have gone to, for Felix and for his wife and for this, but it's Bond on the mission, and that's what you want, and it just caters to Dalton's performance so well. And again, when we, it's easy for us to look back sort of 30 plus years later, but if you're going to go out on a film, what a film to go on. So many Bond actors, and this is why I'm really, really hopeful for the next one. Normally their last film isn't great. Diamonds Forever is terrible. Can't put Lazenby in One and Done. Roger Moore, View to a Kill, questionable. I enjoy it, but personally for him, for his Bond, for his take on it, he's not the memorable thing. The memorable thing about him is that he's old. And Dalton's like, no, this was a fantastic film to go. And obviously it's via circumstances it wasn't approached as his final film, but you can get to Die Another Day, which I'm going to plug you guys' video. I've not listened to it yet. I will be once I get to rewatch the film. You guys have just done a Die Another Day review, which I'm very excited to listen to on the channel. And of course, this leaves me very nervous for No Time to Die. That it's to me, as far as I'm aware, it's the first Bond film they're approaching sequentially as a final Bond film. So I'm hopeful for it, but I think it plays in Dalton's favour looking at it now compared to then, that if he had done a 3rd film, what could he have done? Of course, they would have come up with something. That's their jobs, not mine. And I would have been intrigued, but to look at his performance in this, I think this is his best performance. Obviously, there's only 2 to compare from, but it's one of the best Bond performances of the whole series, of all 25 films by a country mile. It is right up there. And I just don't think any of the actors could have done something to this level. I think maybe more for his interpretation than the performance, but it sort of takes the positives for what Dalton has done. We spoke in Living Daylights that a couple of those scenes, the whole Pierce Brosnan stuff with the cancellation, the uncancellation, that happens and all that. And I said, a lot of these lines feel like it's a Pierce Brosnan thing, flying in, landing on the yacht with the woman, make it 2 hours. That's Pierce Brosnan through and through. And it to me, it just doesn't work for Dalton, because when I think of Dalton, I see this film, and it's such a great way for him to get it. And as I said, it's easy to look back 30 years later and say it's easy, but at the time it was ballsy. And I think adjusted for inflation, this is the lowest grossing Bond film, which is a fascinating. There's always got to be one of them at the bottom, but it is really fascinating. Obviously, that's probably more down to the rating. I think, as you guys said, the Batman coming out that year, which was one of the biggest films in history at the time, box office wise, it's not an easy year to shove something in, but performance wise, can't go wrong. And even with it being his legacy, I mean, to go out on this again, I know it's repeating myself, but it would have had another Living Daylights where it was them trying to do the Bond formula and you didn't get the best out of him. Dalton strikes me as the kind of actor that would have just not come back for the third saying, listen, I've done 2 and it's not worked for me. Whereas the fact that he was able to do this, to go out on this, I think is great.
When I think about License to Kill and Dalton's performance, I always think back to Sean Connery and Dr. No versus From Russia with Love. Now, there's nothing wrong with Sean Connery in Dr. No. In fact, it's one of our favorite of his films. But he's not quite there yet. It's mostly there, but he's not 100% Bond in my mind. From Russia with Love, he's nailed it. He is 100% Bond. And this is exactly the same thing. For Living Daylights, it's kind of a blank Bond. Anyone could be playing that role, and there's definitely some Pierce Brosnan in there. But this is Timothy Dalton's Bond. 100%. He owns that role. And I think that's why I always call this his From Russia with Love. This is basically what would have happened if Sean Connery had stopped at 2. So at least he went out on a high, I suppose, instead of Diamonds Are Forever.
How dare you? Diamonds Are Forever is one of the greatest films of all time. But it's you could tell that Dalton was uncomfortable in his previous film where they gave him those quips, because he either hisses them out really with his teeth just gritted, or he does them really theatrical where he's screaming to the back of the room, and you're like, wow, okay, it's like the afternoon matinee. What is going on? But what I love here is that, every Bond, they kind of have their thing, right? Like Roger Moore, okay, he's the light comedic Bond. Brosnan, it was in many ways the more kind of emotional Bond. He was the one who actually felt things. He had some sensitivity to him. With Dalton, it felt like they finally locked in. He's the intense Bond. He is kind of, a bullet out of a gun. And this is the perfect movie to use that, because it's not getting to the complications of the previous movie where it's it gets very convoluted, very, very convoluted. And this one does in parts as well. I think you could have refined the script a little more to make it a little more straight and narrow. But in terms of what Bond has to do, it's fire this character into this scenario, and he is just gonna tear through it. And you buy it because, I mean, Dalton gritting his teeth fits the movie. It doesn't feel like, he's trying to do romantic comedy dialogue with Miriam Dabo and he's hissing out lines at her. Whereas here, you buy him angry. And I like that they create as well. There's some interesting writing going on here, just comparing his character to Sanchez, where it's Sanchez is a man who's just constantly trying to grab onto loyalty. Whereas Bond here is turning his back on loyalty throughout the film and has to learn the lesson that he actually does need it to succeed. So, I think that really, really works to what Dalton can do really well, because we get to see him arrogant, angry and vengeful through much of the film, which really is his strength in the role. But we also buy it a little more when he has that kind of emotional realization. I think it fits well his theatrical training to kind of let us see that change go on through the character kind of towards the back half. So it does feel like, for an actor like him, who is, I would imagine, signing onto these movies because of the acting challenges, it's giving him enough to probably satisfy him.
Yeah, I think Bond being angry and, as you mentioned, hissing out lines, I think the lines blurred with, is this a character or is this actually just Timothy Dalton being angry and curmudgeonly on set? Who knows? But Yeah, and going to what you just said there, I mean, the original title for this film was called License Revoked, which is hilarious. Apparently, it was test audiences in America where they changed the name because they thought it was associating with the term of driving, which is amazing. But I love that they get him to that place, and it's a logical progression for the character as well, for Dalton's take on the character, in that you get the impression in Living Daylights that this job's weathered him, that it's, you know, he's the haunted Bond, he's the Bond that wants out, but he's kind of trapped in the line of work that he's in. And he will get the job done. You know, if he's on a mission, he will absolutely get it done. But it's taken its toll on him as a human being, and he's basically like a sociopath in that movie. I think I described him as in Living Daylights. And I like that we take that to its extreme in this one, where, you know, he does try to do the right thing. He goes to M and explains the situation. You know, he is making it personal, but quite rightly so. They need some kind of retribution for what's happened to Felix, and Felix has helped them out. M is extremely cold and just cuts him off dead and says that, you know, it's the job he signed up for. You know, this happens. Don't let your personal feelings get in the way, kind of thing. And I love Dalton's expression there, where it looks like he's trying to fight his cause, and he's tensing up, and he's like subduing the anger because he knows that it's M, and he just immediately resigns on the spot there. And I love that he does that. And, you know, we are seeing that with the Craig films as well, in that he is also kind of that haunted Bond, where we are seeing the effects of what the job does to him emotionally, mentally, physically as well. Like they mention, is it in Spectre? Is it where he's like failing his medical and everything?
Skyfall.
I can't remember. Is it Skyfall? Yeah. So we are seeing that with the modern films. You could argue that maybe he retires too much in those newer ones, but I think that that's always been an aspect of the character. And I think that, you know, it takes a Dalton with this film to kind of showcase that Bond isn't just the superhero kind of character. He is, you know, despite the gadgets and everything, and despite what certain films might tell you, Die Another Day when we get to that, he is just a guy, you know, he's just a guy doing a job, and he's going to get it done. So I really like that they went in that aspect with the character as well, like with his retirement.
Yeah, the retirement stuff with Bond's an interesting thing, because I did a bit of research for this, and I believe he's retired / quit 6 times in 25 entries, and 3 of them are in Craig. But you know, you take them out of context, it's easier to make it out. You know, Casino Royale makes sense, whatnot, and obviously, you know, Skyfall's and more the fact he just didn't bother turning back up, so I don't really count that. And Spectre's I'm going out on a whim, but I'm obviously never going to get him back and lose him again this time around. But it's the meaning, and it's the same thing in On Her Majesty's. It's got personal with him on Blofeld. That's the person he's been trying to get. And this one is this is personal with me. He's took it too far. And the angle that I think makes it work for me is all the stuff with Felix. That I hated Felix in the last film. Didn't like the actor for it. I know he's not in it an awful lot, but
he's a good actor. John Terry's a good actor.
I've not seen Lost. Yeah, and he didn't serve a purpose. And then to lose him in the next film, which is very odd, and brings one back from the early Moore era, not the later Moore era as well. Is like, it'd be questionable, but I love him in this one. I think he's great, and to have the motive of one, if it was the last actor that did it, I couldn't see him doing the leg dipping. I know we didn't see much of him. It's me being nasty, but I don't think he'd have been active as Felix. And in this one, Felix kind of feels like his. I don't know if this is a criticism of age thing, so apologies, but it kind of feels like his like old mate that's getting married, like old as in not just you've known for a long time, but he's old as well, and it's him stepping in to help him. But the stuff works well with MI6 because they're saying, you know, leave it for the Americans to deal with. This is CIA, this is American territory, it's not us, you're not involved, get out, stop. And that's why the quitting stuff does work, and that's why the making it personal works. But I think you don't get that if you don't believe in Felix. And going back to that credit scene, the having Felix likable and back with Bond on a mission with Bond, I think opens that door up. And if you haven't seen the earlier films, then it makes it easier for the audience, the casual audience, to follow along with it, that it's as simple as revenge for the dead wife. And I think Felix has this slightly bigger role, but he's in it enough. And the rating as well, to get the Felix in the Shark Tank moment is that's how you know nowadays obviously films want to be edgy, so they'll say it's a 15, and it's edgy to say it's rated R and all that kind of stuff, and they want it to come across edgy. This is just putting like, we're doing it like this because it should be like this, not because we really want it to be edgy. And I think that's a big thing. Of course, that wasn't a trope in the 80s compared to nowadays, but having the seeing of the visual effects of what the villains have done makes the mission believable and boosts what Dalton's going to do, if that sort of tangles. But if you don't get Felix in this role selling it, if you had an average Felix actor, you wouldn't care. So I think they did the right thing switching back.
I mean, just on the Felix point, I think one of the reasons it works is just good writing as well, because from Bond's point of view, you understand why he wants to, get revenge for his friend. We all would do that for our friends. That just makes sense as human beings. But you also get the idea of Emma's right as well. It is the Americans' problem. Why Bond shouldn't be involved as an operative of the British government. He has no reason or jurisdiction to be dealing with this. So, of course, he has his license revoked. And so you can't blame them. So everyone's technically right. And that's just good writing.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's, Chris, you touched on this, but like the fact that this is similar to, On Her Majesty's, and I think George commented on this as well, but like the idea of the wife. Bond knows that he's sort of this damaged soul that's going to go onwards. The way he reacts to Della mentioning, were you married or what have you, or throwing him the garter, right? Like there's a sense he's sort of this, almost like Ronin character just moving on forward. But he knows his friend is going to settle down into a life of, happy married bliss that was ripped away from him. And so just the sense that like it's going to happen again, you understand psychologically how it would shake this guy who already looks a little unhinged. And it's maybe a superficial detail, but Dalton's hair in this movie is strange. Like if you look at the way he's styled in this movie, he's the least like put together I think you ever see an actor as Bond. You can see maybe Craig comes back with like the beard in Skyfall, something like that. But like the way Dalton's made up, he looks like a guy who's almost coming apart. And you do not let them see, like they never try to do that again, where it feels like a character that's actually kind of coming apart at the seams. And I wonder if this was a little bit of the effect of Die Hard the year before, where you had Bruce Willis getting gradually beat up over the course of the movie, where it was like, we want to show our action heroes as being more vulnerable. I don't know if that was part of it, but it is interesting just when I watched the movie to see that Dalton is doing this, because there was no way they were letting other Bond actors do this. Like even Connery, when he's like really brutal, having like fist fights, they're still making him look really well put together. Whereas like Dalton, his hair's sticking up all over the place after a fight. He looks scraped up and bruised after the big truck chase at the end. Yeah. It's doing things with the character and just the style and the look of the character we've never seen before.
Yeah, and that moment at the very end of the film, like right after the truck stuff, where one of my favorite shots is where it almost looks like it's shaky cam, which adds to the disorientation. And it's probably the most beat up I think we've seen Bond so far, at least in memory of what I can think of all the films. And he's like staggering about all over the place. He's collapsing. His clothes are torn. And it's moments like that where it's important to bring that physicality and just look to the character. And I think it is something that we take for granted. You might not even notice it with the broad strokes, but subconsciously you do notice it. And I think that is an important part of it. Moments where he's just sort of like sat drinking and smoking, like, just to take the edge off, probably just of his day-to-day job. It's all little things like that that really amount, I think, with Dalton's character. Going back to Felix really briefly with David Hedison coming back, I think that someone mentioned, or I may have read it when we did Live and Let Die, that he eventually comes back. I've had many sleeps since that review, so I probably forgot about it. And in all honesty, before this point, Felix is a character that didn't really come into his own for me until Casino Royale. That was the first one that I watched, and I think it's the one that, aside from this film, now I've seen it, actually did something with the character. And the character's been recast so many times, and he's not really a consistent character. There's good chunks of films where he doesn't show up at all. You have last week's with The Living Daylights, where he's in maybe like a minute of screen time, accomplishes pretty much nothing in that film. And then in the next film, he's recast again with, like an older guy with David Hedison from Live and Let Die. So if I hadn't have read that, I probably wouldn't have remembered personally that he was from Moore's first film. But I do think with having an older Felix, take out of the equation whether he's been in a Bond film before, I think just with age comes a certain level of, just maturity and authority with a character like that as well. You get the impression that Felix has been on many missions, just looking at the two together in this film, that they've been on probably mission after mission together, with regards to which actors played them. Just from this film alone, I think the casting was quite spot on with that. It is weird, though, that they would, the same director and this whole new look, you could possibly call it a soft reboot with, like a new money penny, a new look to everything. the very next film with Dalton, you'd go back to an earlier cast member for Felix. So it is strange, but I don't think this would have worked with John Terry's take on the character. It might have been nice to actually get more time with his depiction of the character to get a better sense of it. But I think just, even for the diehard fans that know that this is a recurring actor from an older one, even to them, it's probably cool seeing him back again, and they have that attachment to the character.
Yeah, no, that's the good thing of these. I think as well, I really want to quickly bring up Sharky, who is one of Feaster End, only because maybe I'm being super nasty, but I keep bringing up every video. Every John Glenn film, he just kills an ally, and it's always been a Bond trick. You get the Bond girls that they'll kill to use to push Bond and do that, or vice versa. And the John Glenn ones have just become a running joke, and they're like, aha, you were a friend of Bond's? Well, prepare to die, because that's exactly what's going to happen for every film in a row. So. And Sharky's one of those ones where I wish we'd got more from him, because it's like he's with them in the car and the wedding, and he's involved, and it's so quickly gone. Gone, he's dead, off screen, body brought to them on a boat. And I want to bring that because that's one of my, I wouldn't say it's a major criticism, but it's that we know these guys are bad. What more evil things are you going to do? Just kill the only other ally left, which is maybe a blessing because we get Q out of it, which I don't know if anyone wants to get to Q if it's too early, but this is the most active Q film, I'd say, until the Skyfall era. If you can even say that he's on missions with him in the field, but really in the field's the point they're sharing a hotel room.
Well, I'm up for any film that has, Q and Bond sharing single bunks in the room together. I really want to see what that film is like, of just them two sharing, or like a sitcom version of that. Just Q and Bond talking about who's going to have the top and bottom bunk. That would be fun. I think it's nice to see Q here with Bond, but I also almost prefer him in the lab. I think he's more in his element there, personally, just showing off the gadgets and being funny, whereas here he's just kind of that guy that drives him around a bit.
Yeah. Q's there for a couple of reasons. One, it sort of ties to this whole thing of Bond turning his back on people that are loyal to him. He's also there to talk to Pam Bouvier. That is a character who's often sidelined, and so they put her with Q so that there's actually someone for her to share scenes with. And I know Desmond Llewellyn always held this one up as, I think, his favorite, he said, of the movies he made, because largely he got to do so much more. He got he got bits and pieces in Octopussy where he's on the hot air balloon and stuff. But this one, it feels like if you're an actor, you actually get to act. He actually got to do things dramatically with the character that we'd never really seen before. And I think it works well in terms of using Q. David Hedison was interesting because he is so much older than Dalton, or at least he appears older than Dalton in the movie. And you wonder if there's a certain parallel they're trying to strike there, where it's like Bond's older friend, an ally, is, basically very badly injured, actually in the way that Felix was in the novel Live and Let Die, actually. That's what happened to him in the second Bond book. But then you have Q show up, who's fulfilling a similar type of almost paternal role. And it's about Bond kind of coming back around to that by the end. So I don't think they're giving Q like heavy lifting, but I appreciate his presence and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, I like him as more of a supporting character in this one. If for anything, it's just a bit of a change of pace, isn't it? Like, I love seeing him in the lab, like it's what he does best, and it's always great. And Llewellyn's just fantastic as Q, isn't he? Like he's just always brings his A game. He's always hilarious. But yeah, it was slightly different in this. He is still very much the sort of comic relief character, which is what he does best. There's some great gadgets in this one as well, where he gives his sales pitch on all the different gadgets that he brings to the table. But yeah, it did feel slightly different. And I think actually that was a topic that someone mentioned. I don't think we mentioned it on the review last week. I think it was in the comments that we saw, but the changing dynamic of Bond and Q, which I think starts from the Daltons. And I mean, well, as of this recording, I've only seen one Brosnan film at this point, but even in that respect, it felt different. And I think that is something that I've been told progresses in the Brosnan ones, but I think the initial shift in that relationship between the two probably came from these ones. And you do see that more. He is more of like he's in the field with them, isn't he, in this particular one, and he feels a bit more amicable in this one than he usually is. He's not constantly berating Bond, and the other way around that is sort of like the go-to thing. Really quickly with Sharky as well, I love his character from the off, like when they say, look, we're going to go and deal with this thing, and he's just sort of screaming at them on the highway like, what am I going to tell his wife? Like, I've got to like stall for time. So I do love moments like that. I think it's the fact that he dies off screen. It is kind of a trope. I think I've seen that in loads of films now where it'll be through binoculars or something, where someone will be coming in and it'll have like they'll be captured or they'll be dead or something, which shocks the main character. I think that's a trope in a lot of spy things. But he does get one of my favorite moments, and it's where, I mean, George, this will be an absolute horror film for you, won't it, with all the sharks in this film? In terms of all the shark Bond films so far, and there've been a lot, this is probably the most horrifying one due to everything that happens with sharks in it. But it's where Bond runs, they in like the little sort of motorized boat, the little rubber dinghy thing, and like Bond runs over this metal mesh flooring, and the shark bursts through, jump scare, almost gets Bond. And there's the moment where Sharky's in the boat, and if I was in that situation, I'd be exactly the same. It's like, am I safer in the boat, or should I try and make a run for it too and get in there where Bond is? It's just a really, really small moment. Love it. But he also does get one of, I don't know if it's my favorite one-liner, but it's where Bond kicks the guy into the shark tank with all the money, and they're kind of like standing over and looking down, and he says, damn, what a waste of money. I don't know. It's a nice, neat little line. He doesn't get loads to do, but he is worth mentioning, I think, in a review. It's just a shame that he didn't get more to do. But then again, the film is 2 hours, 15 minutes almost, and would more scenes have really changed the film all that much? I think he serves the narrative for, what he has to do.
Yeah, I want to quickly add to the shark stuff. If I'm right, I'm just trying to scan Brosnan and Craig here through my head. I think it's the last time we get sharks in James Bond, which is fantastic for me.
Oh, is it?
But maybe for shark fantasies, I'm just scanning now. I'm trying to think. I could be, if I'm wrong, someone comment it. But
it's going to be No Time to Die, isn't it? We're going to get sharks in no time. I can feel it.
Well, Cam is a bit of a shark expert, so I think he could give us a definite answer on that one.
Yeah, there's no sharks, unfortunately. Although that said, sorry, and I Never Say Never Again was before this. That had sharks, but yeah, no, that's it. I'm always fingers crossed. Although I don't want to see CG sharks like we saw the CG Komodo dragons. Like, that's just a bummer.
Yeah.
And just a little fact check that one too. I believe that they're selling this great white shark. To the best of my knowledge, you can't actually hold great white sharks in captivity. They die. So
they have to constantly swim, don't they?
Yeah, and they also eat so much it would probably be very expensive. Although I guess Sanchez could afford it, but like that always kind of threw me because I could see them holding like maybe a tiger shark or a bull shark, but a great white, that's very ambitious.
I mean, they have one in Ace Ventura, right? That's what it reminded me of a little bit.
Yep, and Jaws 3.
Yeah. Oh boy. Shall we move on to the Bond girls then? Only 2 in this one, as Cam mentioned, like the more monogamous Bond, and you know what, I'm fine with that. I've seen GoldenEye at this point, so I know that it doesn't last for very long. Let's start with our main one then. So we've got Kerry Lowell as Pam Bouvier. She's probably one of my favorites, in all honesty. I love this character, and I think ultimately what it came down to was not only is she capable, I mean, she looks amazing. I love the moment, and I think there's a similar moment in Casino Royale as well, where in this film he gives her some money and he says, you've got to look the part, right? So go get some new clothes. And she comes in and she looks an absolute $1 million, and Bond does a double take. And I think that happens with Vesper as well, when he goes to the table in that film and she comes in the dress. Because she does it to be a distraction for Le Chiffre, I think, doesn't she, in that film? So I love moments like that in the Bond film, but I think it was the ending for me, and I'm probably jumping the gun way, way far and going straight to the ending with this thing, because I do kind of want to end on this when I talk about Dalton and his impact. This is kind of, it is the 80s one, but it feels like a John Hughes ending, and I love it. It feels like something from the end of 16 Candles, or I know he didn't direct this, but or Say Anything, or Some Kind of Wonderful. And it's the fact that Bond goes after her. And I don't know if it's that sort of like more monogamous Bond. I say this, he had a different woman in the previous film. But even in that film, I know that the guys from Really 007 mentioned that you really buy into that relationship at the end with Kara's character. And she just feels nice, and the two just feel nice. And that's a horrible word, nice. I don't know why I'm using it so much, but And I kind of get that at the end of this film as well. I love that she's capable. When you first see her in the bar, that song that plays, by the way, in the background, they're in like a kind of strip club kind of thing. Dirty Love by Tim Feehan. Love that song. So it was just great to hear 80s music in this film. She's kind of decked out like Sarah Connor. You know, she's got like the Kevlar vest and she's got like cocking the shotgun. She looks incredible. Although when she shoots that in the wall, like it's perfect circle, absolute perfect circle. I don't think that would happen, but I'm fine with it. And yeah, like she can do everything. She's, as I mentioned, she's like the action heroine. She mentions that she's a pilot. She's a capable pilot. She's been in all these previous missions. She can stand toe to toe with Bond, but you do kind of feel for her when she is pining after Bond, and it's not like a kind of simpering pining away for. It genuinely feels like she cares about him and she wants to be with him. And you really get that at the end of the film with the gesture that he does when he jumps off the balcony and into the pool, which is probably my second favorite Bond ending, actually. I think On Her Majesty's has got to take it just for dramatic impact, at least until the main theme kicks in the credits and just snaps me out of that moment. But this is probably a close second for me. That coupled with the panning shot of the cityscape at nighttime. Can't say enough positive about it. But yeah, Pam Bouvier, probably one of my favorites in all honesty.
Yeah, Pam's great. I think Scott, you mentioned something really good earlier, that you like Bond being surrounded by competent people, and she is precisely that. You know, when you think some of my favorite sort of Bond girls across the series, you've got Tracy, of course, who is also competent, and obviously Vesper when we get to Casino Royale. And I know Chris Johnson was enough, and I love Electra King in that film, but that's, again, it's characters they develop is probably a better word, and are capable of being around him. And you know, so many Bond films fall flat within that. Certainly, obviously, dependent on the era, on what the Bond is trying to do. I think that's a very important thing. It always depends on the Bond's approach and the writing to the film. But I think Pam's great. And you mentioned T2. Obviously, my terminology isn't as good as yours, but this is pre-T2 as well, which is even kind of cooler, because if it had been that sort of, mid-90s, they'd been like, oh, yeah, Sarah, like 90s, like, oh, they're just trying to do the T2 type thing. But
Ripley would have probably been a better comparison, I guess, because that was 82, wasn't it, with Aliens, I think?
Yeah, but the way, even the meeting her, the fact that she's an informant, that she's aware, that she knows people watching her, and I think she's wonderful. I think her and Dalton have great chemistry for two that are more alike as well. I think their scenes together work, and when we do get to the final ending, the fact that, I know it happens in many films, but, it's normally them screaming and him running to save her. And this time it's her saving him. And that doesn't happen an awful amount of times. And then you've got her on the plane sequence as well. It's him in the trucks. It's not the usual type of stuff. So I think Pam's a really good character. And I think she's one of the few that isn't spoken about enough. That I know I'd argue she's not in it as much as the others. That obviously they you'll get scenes with her, and then it's with Lupe. I can't pronounce it, Lupe. Yeah. And then you're detracting, and it all builds up to the ending you mentioned, which I also really enjoy. That it's something that's grown on me the more I've sort of thought about that scene, the way it works, the way it's done, because it works for the film and it works for Dalton's Bond. So I think Pam's massively underrated in the bigger picture.
Before I talk about Pam, I just can't get the idea of I can't get this image of like a John Hughes ending out of my head now, of just maybe him like whipping her around in the pool, and then Don't You Forget About Me starts playing, and
freeze frame, love it.
Yeah, perfect. That's how I end this film. But I love Pam Bouvier as a character. She's at least easily top 10 of Bond girls of all time. And I resonate everything you guys have just said, so I won't repeat it. I will actually say a criticism of the character, unfortunately for me. And it's the fact that she seems to lose that competency we were talking about a little bit as the film goes on, because her agency seems to disappear as she stops hanging around Bond so much and maybe is around Q a bit more. I know she's pivotal in the end scene, but I don't know if she's that important later on in the film. And I feel like the film kind of forgets about her a little bit and focuses more on Bond. It's a Bond film. Of course, you're going to focus on Bond. But it's like they almost got her to the finish line for me, and she doesn't quite make it as like the top, like Tracy level.
That's fair.
Yeah, like for me, I think Pam, I really like this character a lot. She feels in some ways almost like a beta test for what Natalia will be in GoldenEye, where it's a much more of like a partner character. I think Pam has a couple problems, and like I am a big fan of this character. I actually think she's one that people should be paying more attention to, and what she means for sort of the evolution of the female lead in the franchise, and the types of things she gets to do in a movie. But it's like Scott said, I think the character kind of gets lost a little there in the middle there when Bond heads off to, hang out with Sanchez. She's kind of just left to mope in the hotel room a lot, which I'd like to see her being more active. I also think the setup for the romance is really clunky. Like, they meet in a bar that to me reminded me of Roadhouse.
Yeah.
And then they like escape on a boat and they're instantly making out. And I'm like, this is a movie that's asking me to buy a little more psychological realism from Bond. And this moment feels a little too thrown together. I would like it maybe if they built the romance a little more as opposed to just bam, right away on the boat. I think it would have totally worked if you just had them escape and then slowly she starts to be drawn to Bond over the course of their time in Isthmus. That would make complete sense to me. That would also make kind of the culmination of the big, scene in the pool that much more profound, right? Because it's like the big moment where they actually connect. But what I think really works for the character, though, is that she's doing things on her own. Like, it's not tied to Bond. She's investigating Stinger missiles. And to me, that's where like the plot gets a little convoluted when we start working in things like, the Stinger missile subplot and everything. But nonetheless, she's there doing her own things. She's working with Felix independently. We also see her meeting with Sanchez independently. Also, she goes on her own to uncover this whole scheme without, Wayne Newton. I was going to say Wayne Knight there. That would be amazing if it was Wayne Knight. But Wayne Newton, like, she's the one who's doing all this. Bond's not there for any of it. And we buy everything she's going through. When she's in this room with this guy, you're never like, well, this is really unsettling. She's in control of the whole situation. She pulls out the gun. So, like, I think Pam is an awesome character when she's swooping in there in the plane. I buy it. I think it's the sort of thing, though, that as they would go forward with Natalia, Lynn, Jinx, even, they would really play up how not just competent they are, but how they could really showcase their competency in the movies. Whereas I think Pam, they do, but they kind of don't go 100%. They're kind of at like 80%.
To your point about like the immediate romantic connection they have, I can't remember in the film if they're aware of each other before, if the characters have history, or is that the first time that both of them are meeting in person?
So he sees her in Felix's office around the wedding.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So I thought they'd been on like missions and stuff. I might be misremembering that. Yeah. In that case, again, I completely agree with you. But I think what made it work for me, I get it on paper that, they should have delayed that, but I think it's just the chemistry of the acting. Like, I still bought it, even though it was really quick and it was pretty much immediate. I still bought it, and I thought those actors absolutely brought their A game for that. So I didn't have any problems with that. And then I guess kind of like our final Bond girl for this film, there's only really two. You have Lupe Lamora, played by Talisa Soto. I really like the addition of a character, and I think she's a necessary inclusion in the film as well. And going back to the Tenet thing as well, this was another thing that kind of reminded me what Nolan dipped into this, where you have your main villain who has this woman around and she wants to break away, and he's really abusive towards her as like a symbol of control and everything. So I liked her character, and I like that there is kind of that subplot where she wants to get away, and it makes for a perfect ending. The 80s John Hughes ending, as I mentioned, where you have like the popular girl and the kind of not so popular one, and then he goes for the right one at the end. She is very flighty, and I love that they kind of pay that off at the end, where he's like, I think you and El Presidente will make a perfect couple, before he jumps off the balcony. But I think she plays it really well as well. Like the moment which you mentioned, Scott, at the beginning, where he's sort of like whipping her at the beginning. It's like horrible stuff to watch, and it immediately sets him up as a villain. But I don't like wish ill will. Like, she doesn't feel like a villain. Like, she comes across as very flighty and is just going to kind of latch on to the person who has like the most authority in the moment. Like, she'll move from person to person, as kind of Bond does in many ways. But you kind of want her to get away from there. Like, she has probably put herself in this situation, but you don't want to see her get killed. You definitely don't want to see her get beaten. So she's this interesting character, but I like that she's there. I think she's an integral part of the film. And if you remove her, I think you do lose like a considerable dynamic. She serves as the kind of Bond girl that Bond has to rescue, but she's also given enough, ties to the villain as well, and his motive and his sense of control and power over people, and also makes for a damn good Bond ending at the end that makes me very happy, because I love those romantic 80s films. And anyway, I'm going to pass over to George now. I'm rambling.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna throw this. I'm not a big fan of her. I don't know if I'm in a minority with that. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and say that, obviously it's there to make Sanchez a villain.
Yeah.
I feel that very much in many films, the abusive, evil, drug kingpin. It's of course the abusive drug kingpin because he's a drug kingpin. He's the villain of the film. And, I think we get enough from her. I'm not going to say it'd be horrible to say she should have died or any of that kind of stuff, but I feel there's a natural exit point in the opening third, and I wish they'd have just sent her out and we'd have got more stuff with Pam. And I understand the purpose of keeping her in, but personally, I'm not really a fan of her. That when you get the jump at the end, I like the ending, as you said, but I never really felt like it was a competition. That he was always going to really, really go for Pam. So I'm a bit torn with it because I said I don't dislike the character, but I also don't like her that much. She's just kind of there, but I feel that her purpose is certainly more so for the villainous side of things, which is what I don't want to say I like, but I appreciate them doing that more because it's the instant setup of Sanchez, as we said. She's cheating on him, and he's going to rip the heart out of the guy that she's cheating on him with, and it's that kind of dynamic. It's just the villainous trait. So I don't have too much to say on her. I don't think the performance is bad. I don't think it's particularly good. I just think that it could have been anyone. Me being absolutely bluntly honest about it.
I want to reassure you, George, that I'm on your side. For me, of the Bond girls in history, she's just such a nothing. She's kind of there for the plot. I get it. I also think you're right. She probably could have disappeared after the first act or so, and the film wouldn't have changed. Obviously, you wouldn't get that funny ending. But I have a theory that I'm not going to get into too much because it's going to spoil maybe a little bit the future films. But for instance, The World Is Not Enough.
That's what I was thinking. Sorry.
Yeah.
I almost said it. Yeah.
It's like Bond can only write one good female character in a film, and then it just like spends itself, and it can't do any more than that. And that's all I'll say about it, really.
Yeah, I remember when Goldeneye was coming out, Entertainment Weekly, the magazine, put out a series of best and worst of Bond. So they went through the history and named their favorites and their least favorites. And I remember they named Lupe the worst Bond girl. I don't agree with that. I actually, Mary Goodnight's the one that jumps out to me. But yeah, like I remember they were really hard on old Lupe. And I think Talisa Soto's okay. She has some rough line readings, though. The I love Bond so much kind of line where you're like, oof, that's kind of tough. But she's also being asked to play it like a little more, well, realistically in some ways, and also more, I'm sure that they were like, tone it down, keep it kind of low. We're not doing the typical kind of more, cartoonish type of character that we often see in these types of movies. So I think in some ways it also strips her of some of the charisma you might have gotten had they played that character up more. Mm-hmm. And I think it works within the movie. I don't have any real issues with her as a character, how they use her throughout the movie. It's more that I think when we talk about maybe why she's not that memorable, that's part of the reason why. She doesn't have like big lines that we remember or like a big set piece. To me, when I think of this character and what I like the most about her, it's honestly maybe her scenes with Milton Crest, the Anthony Zerbe character, where she's like telling him off. And we see that while she may be flighty, she's someone who has backbone and will put this guy in his place. So it shows the strength of that character that's maybe there, because I think when you have a character who is this sort of classic Bond, the kept woman who the villain has, there's a tendency to play them as kind of helpless damsels. And I like that they show that while she is being held by Sanchez, she does have a backbone and has an inner toughness. So you don't feel like it's a pathetic character, because I think that would really do there would be like almost an uncomfortable vibe to maybe revisiting this movie now if it was just kind of this pathetic character. Yeah.
I will just jump in, actually. I forgot to say a thought about the Lupe character. Sorry, I said the name wrong there. Was it Lupe? No, it is Lupe. Yeah. The Lupe character, yeah. I made a note when I was watching it today. This is the first time I've noticed this. I feel like they were trying to base her off of Michelle Pfeiffer's character in Scarface.
Yeah. I was thinking, yeah.
Well, the movie is Bond versus Scarface, right? So...
Yeah, and I thought the whole idea was she was meant to be kind of like strung out and addicted, and they wanted to go down that sort of drugs route, but you don't actually see anyone really taking drugs in this film, even though he is a kingpin of drugs. And I thought maybe they were going to use that, and that might make more sense for the characters, why she doesn't seem like she's quite there sometimes. Mm-hmm. But they never actually like go in for the kill and tell you that's why she's not really there. So that just jumped out to me.
I think that would have been like the first 18 rated Bond film, wouldn't it? I think if they'd have like substance abuse in there, maybe. But
it's like in America, it was actually a PG-13, which is crazy. This would be R-rated now. There's no way this movie passes a PG-13 now. It's kind of from that era where things like, Gremlins got a PG.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But I think if they'd worked drugs into this and had her actually be addicted to drugs, you're getting your R rating. I think that was probably the dividing line. That's my guess. Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned Michelle Pfeiffer and Scarface, though, because when I was watching this film, I was thinking to myself, this feels like a Brian De Palma film or like a Michael Mann film or something in some aspects. Like really much does, especially of like that 80s generation as well. 80s films didn't play, did they? And I love that about them. I love how near the mark they were. Like they earned their ratings as well. Like PGs, like that was when PG meant something. I'm not going to get on my 80s soapbox. I could. I'm not going to. So I'm going to get down right from there right now. Let's talk about the villain then, because we've kind of been peppering elements of the villain. I think he definitely is probably going to be one of the biggest talking points on this review. Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davi. Who now having watched this, I feel ashamed to say that the only film, I think he's in Die Hard, isn't he? I think he's in Predator 2. It's been a while since I've seen those films. It was The Goonies for me. It was Brother Fratelli. And that was kind of the only thing that I knew him from. And I want to slap myself on the wrist for that because he is phenomenal in this. And you read about the behind the scenes and how he went about the character, how he got into character. He studied sort of, drug kingpins and cartels and everything. And he's a method actor as well. So he would stay in character all the time between shoots. So absolutely fair play to him. He learned scuba diving for the bit where the armored car goes under the water. Like, he did so much for this role. He went above and beyond for this character, and it absolutely shows. And as I mentioned, he feels the most realistic Bond villain that we've had so far. Whether he's memorable because of that, I don't know, or if it's sort of like, the fans of this film, sort of like the cult fans of this, know that he's one of the best. But in the broader strokes of the Bond conversation, before that point, I'd never heard Sanchez mentioned. It's the usual henchman, some henchwomen in there, and then Blofeld. They're kind of like your big hitters, or Goldfinger, or Oddjob, Jaws. Sanchez was never ever mentioned at all. Even in sort of like the modern era of Bond, I'd go from sort of like Dalton, Brosnan to Craig. Never mentioned at all, and I think he absolutely has to be. He is playing it, and indeed the majority of the film feels like it is just like an 80s R-rated action film, and he's a villain suited to that. It is like a horrible character that you'd see in, like, I don't know, Cobra or something, just where he's just bad news. He's just not a good guy. But I do like, and this is like with a lot of crime films as well, or spy films, well, actually mostly crime films or mob films, they always have a personal code to them. In what they do. And I think actually he was the one who suggested, Davi, the actor, came up with a line about that loyalty is more important to him than money. And that is like the base for his character. And I mean, he is ruthless. He is horrible. Like the way that he offs a bunch of his henchmen as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about when we talk about them respectively. He's just tremendous. He feels terrifying. He feels scary, and he feels someone who can go toe to toe with Bond. The moments where they're talking amongst each other, I was getting on Her Majesty's Secret Service vibes, where Bond goes in disguise to Blofeld, and just hearing the two in conversation, and they're both almost like playing a game of chess with each other. Just hearing them talk and trying to outdo the other person and out connive the other person, it's just fascinating to watch, and it works for this film as well. I love that it's sort of like that inner sabotage film, and it's all to do with drugs. And maybe they just decided to do that as well because it was the 80s, and that was a theme that is in a lot of 80s, Lethal Weapon, I think, like Beverly Hills Cop, RoboCop. There's so many sort of like hard-edged R-rated films out there that deal with like the drugs and the drug war. And I mean, it was the 80s. Everyone was doing cocaine in the 80s. So, it makes sense. And I think he's probably one of the best villains. I don't think he's memorable, as I mentioned, because he's not one of the campy, over-the-top ones, which I think is a trademark of Bond. But because this is breaking the mold of what we know as Bond and was going for that more realistic film, he's the perfect villain for it. If you went like a completely over-the-top villain with this thing, the whole film would have come crashing down, I think.
Yeah, I'd love Sanchez. I'm the sort of the inversion of you that I'd seen License to Kill and then I saw The Goonies after. I was like, what's Sanchez doing in the Goonies? I didn't like that film. Definitely about 10 years too old to watch it when I finally got around to it. But
that's fair. Yeah,
he's one of the. I'm not even going to say underrated. I think because he's not a megalomaniac, because he's not in one of the marketable films, one of the ones that everyone speaks about when you put Bond on the pedestal. You look at the formula, you look at this, but there is, off the top of my head, there's no one more fearsome than Sanchez. That when he's one-on-one with any character, you feel that he could go for that kill, and it's not going to be the he's villainous, he has to kill them. It's no, like, this guy is a threat, and he is a legit threat, that he's not trying to take over the world. He just wants to run his cartel in kind of peace, I guess you could say. And I think he is the match of Timothy Dalton's Bond. That it's that realness, that the fact that the film's opening up with him already established, them chasing him, and he's already escaped, and he bribes everyone and everywhere to get his way out of things, and he's almost an enigma until we get to know him properly. I think that's what benefits when Bond's getting to know him. And then, to Dalton's credit, it's the classic trope of the hero making the villain question those within his ranks, the form of deception, the best way of it, how they go about the planting and stuff. And I think Davi's incredible in this. I absolutely love him. And one of my favorite things of many Bond tropes is that he just randomly has a pet lizard on his shoulder. And
iguanas are a girl's best friend, aren't they? Yeah, I think he says.
And like, it's great. Like, whenever you see footage, it's just like the iguana there. Like, I'll take it. Like, you know, it's. I guess I don't know if it counts as a feature or anything, but it's kind of like, we did a Bond villain that's a bit different. It's sticking an iguana on his shoulder. We'll say that's his habit. One thing I want to say, I did read that you mentioned about the method acting, which is great. Apparently, when they're filming in Mexico, he was going into bars in character, and apparently all the locals were scared of him. And apparently the actors were saying, like, I think John Glenn said it was really funny because when the crew were there, they were laughing and stuff because they saw, obviously, it's just him in characters. But to these guys, they have the faintest idea why this man was acting like a kingpin. And I love reading stories about, like, method acting. Obviously, this isn't a Jared Leto conversation, but, you know, luckily Robert Davi wasn't sending real people dead things and stuff like that. So that's a bonus. But I think he's great in this. I think, is he one of my favorite villains? Probably not. But as I said, I think because the fear's there, he feels real. I think that adds his own element to him. When you're going to really sit him and compare him to the others, that's definitely something that works in his favor. But there's, I'm not saying there's something missing, but my favorite part about him, I think, is that if you watch the film, it's Bardario. I believe he kills every henchman of his rather than Bond's doing it, which is a lovely thing. Again, going back to that 80s sort of film with the drug kingpin that starts turning on his own. And also, by the time he gets to the ending, his goal is just to kill Bond. He doesn't care about the money. He doesn't care about the drugs or anything else. He just wants to kill Bond at this point in time. So I like that sort of personal section that he gets, and his death as well. Yeah. You know, when Bond delays the reveal of why with the lighter, it's fantastic.
Well, it's funny you should mention that iguana because, you know, I was thinking about this earlier today, and you know, it's strange because Robert Davi's character is a man out of time. Okay, so if Sanchez was a character in a Craig film, we would be talking about him non-stop. He would be one of the best villains of all time. I just feel like he's stuck in this film that people don't watch because it's a Timothy Dalton film.
Yeah, and
so he just gets forgotten about. He's such a well-written character. And I would say he's probably one of my most liked villains. I don't say liked, they're villains, I don't like them. Well, of course I liked him. But he has an actual menace about him. And he's not a batshit insane guy. He's not a Blofeld trying to blow up the world. He just wants to sell some drugs and make some money, which I don't think that's a good thing, obviously, folks. Don't do that. But it's quite low stakes in terms of like a world domination thing. But he still is able to be an absolute menace and have a sense of fear about him that he might have Bond's number.
Mm.
He also feels like a really good actor to put up against Timothy Dalton. Because it's like, Robert Davi seems like a bit of an eccentric dude and very intense. You could say the exact same thing about Timothy Dalton. So, you know, the same way that, like, I think, you know, GoldenEye really is strengthened by having, you know, Brosnan and Sean Bean together, like two actors who could easily play James Bond. I think this works really well, where you have two kind of methody. I mean, Dalton's not really a method actor; he's more of a stage actor, but he has that intensity of a method actor. And you put the two of them side by side, and you just want to watch them play off each other. And maybe the problem in terms of why Sanchez is, he's not regarded as highly among kind of the general fans is like the pleasures of that character are the psychological profile of him, which was not really done at this point in time. Max Zorin is not a deep dive into the psychology of that character. Like you just don't get that sort of thing. You get that sort of thing when we get to the Craig era in a character like Silva, for example, where there's actually there's themes going on with that character. Silva has that. And also a lot of the pleasure of the character is just watching him and Dalton together. The scenes where they are playing off one another, the way, when Dalton's going to visit him at his compound. I don't know that that's the sort of thing a lot of general moviegoers really get excited about. They want to see Blofeld in the chair holding the cat or whatever, like villains doing kind of big things. Goldfinger with his gold revolver in a plane, moments like that. Sanchez, it's like you kind of just get this guy, you watch this guy get psychologically broken down gradually over the course of the movie. And an example of that reminds me, a more recent one is the John Travolta character in the movie The Punisher, the first Punisher movie, where they basically do the exact same thing as what he does here in License to Kill. But it's sort of like the pleasure is watching that character get broken down. And I don't know that sells to a general audience as much. Like, I don't think they have as much fun watching it. But I don't know. I have an awful lot of fun when I'm watching him, like, somewhat in awe of what's going on during that entire chase where just tanker trucks are exploding all over the place. And then just to watch him just like a mad dog chasing after Bond with a machete. You don't see Bond villains do that. It's fantastic.
I got to address the iguana in the room here, because I was going to ask you guys before we started the review, do you guys have any props for this film? And I couldn't think of what props you have. Have we topped the slide whistle? I mean, that was pretty special last time. I think it's on equal par. But what was it with iguanas in the 80s? Like, just thinking about it now, Sarah Connor had one in the first Terminator film. What was with that?
I had one.
Everyone had an iguana, apparently.
His name was Ricardo, and he was mean, real mean. He bit and clawed every friend I had. My parents gave it to me, and the whole idea is like, well, iguanas are very docile. They sit on your shoulder, like, Scott is displaying right now in the video. Ricardo would go for your ears. I don't know what was the story there, but he ended up passing on after 6 years, but my parents actually got another one afterwards. So we had another iguana named Jade for about 15 years, and she was lovely, like the one in the movie.
Nice. Oh, my God. How do I move the conversation? I don't know. I love it. I love it. I guess we have some more villains to talk about. Let's talk about probably chief among them. We need to talk about Benicio del Toro. I actually thought this was his first film as the character of Dario. It's not his first credited role. It's actually his second. He apparently was in Big Top Pee-wee as a character called Duke the Dog-Faced Boy. So I don't know. I've seen Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Apparently, this was a sequel to that movie. I haven't seen the sequel. He's almost like as memorable as Sanchez in this for me. I think it's just down to the fact that it's Benicio del Toro, though. Knowing him more for his recent films to go back to some of his earlier ones, but even just what he brings to the character, it's like the creepy smile that he has in this and just how kind of off the rails he has. Do you want me to mention the line, George, or do you want to do the impression? Because we both wrote the same line down for this one.
I can't remember the full thing, but it's the way he says, like, honeymoon. Like, he's so... I think it's because it's Benicio del Toro is such a fascinating individual, and I hope this doesn't sound horrible. Like, you look at his early films, and he's this gaunt, sort of like great sort of hitman and whatnot. When you obviously think of this, you can think of Usual Suspects, and when we see him as he's a bit older, I don't want to say he's full, that sounds horrible, but his like face structure's evolved, and I don't know if that's just me that spotted
maturity.
Like,
I think that's just called getting older. I think
he's just like filled a bit, but he's still as menacing. And obviously Sicario is probably the big one a lot of people speak about. I've not seen the Che Guevara film, but when the first time I saw this film, I did not know Benicio del Toro was in it. And I was like, is that Benicio del Toro? And like many people, was like, he did things before The Usual Suspects. Like people make out that it was the first time he'd done a film. And I know I think because Kevin Spacey was similar in that one, wasn't it? I think it was before Seven. And I was like, no, Benicio was great. And in this film, and talk about Dario, because he's not an all-time henchman for me. I think I love the fact they've got the actor to play him, and as time has gone by, that's benefited it. But the thing I love about Dario is not only is he menacing, because they all should be menacing, he disappears out the film for such a long amount of time. And you were sitting there when it was only the second time I'd seen it the other week as well. So I'd forgotten bits. Obviously, you're never going to forget how it ends for him. But I was kind of there like, why isn't he coming back in this? But when he does come back into it, that's the tension. When Dario turns up, and then you realize, shit, Bond was there at the bar with him. And is he going to clock him? And that's when it starts clicking in my head. Like, oh my God, this is incredible. And it's a really interesting use of the henchman that he's not there to be the muscle for the villain. He's there for the knowledge for the villain, which doesn't happen often in the Bond films. And I really enjoy him. But I also enjoy him because it's Benicio del Toro. So, and also, how many Bond henchmen's deaths do you watch and you feel sorry for them? Like, I mean, he's a terrible, evil man. But the grinder, it is gnarly to watch. That it makes me shiver. I don't look away from films. I still don't. But that one shivers me.
It's certainly a memorable way to go. It's not something I'd ever want to experience, I hope. But the one thing that always jumps out about Dario, and I agree, the first time I saw this film, I was like, oh, I didn't know he was in this film. It just jumped out at me. Benicio del Toro didn't know that. He has this weird knife thing he does a couple of times in the film. Does anyone catch that?
Yeah, he just like swipe.
Yeah, he just like exaggerated hand motion for some strange reason. I don't know why that was a choice, but hey, that's all I ever remember about his character is like he's like Saturday Night Fever with a knife.
This is to me a case of what happens when you cast one of the best actors of their generation in a kind of nothing role, and you get a character you remember, because it's like, how could you not, with the charisma he's bringing? He, as you said, he wanders out of the movie for a huge chunk of it. And I like that they tie the suspense of that whole scene at the, at the factory of, will he spot Bond? Will he clock him? But in terms of like a character, even compared to other Bond henchmen, he gets very little to do. And in many ways, you would almost look at like Milton Crest as in some ways more of the prominent, henchman, because he just has more to do. He has more dialogue. But I think Dario's the one we remember more, just because you're watching like a future movie star work at a very high wattage level. And the fact that he's standing next to Davi, who is very imposing and very memorable just in terms of his performance style, and somehow Dario is standing out doing almost nothing. He has one line where he goes wacky with the honeymoon, which, it's sort of that era where Benicio del Toro's doing weird things with dialogue, because he does that in The Usual Suspects, where famously, when he started actually speaking in the movie, none of the actors could understand him. And they were just like, just go with it. And it's great. But again, it's kind of a weird experimental actor who's right now has a very like Hollywood leading man look. So he really does work, because it's the weirdness mixed with, I think, an actor who's just attractiveness level really does stand out in the movie as well.
He's just a great character actor, though, isn't he? Like, you look at him in the Marvel films as the Collector. He's always great at playing really zany, off the wall characters. Star Wars: The Last Jedi, as well as the character of DJ with like all that stuff he was doing. It's nuts, and it all comes from him. Like, I doubt that was in the script. That's probably something he just brings to it. Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 5 O's I added into the word honeymoon when I made the note. I just wanted to check how many I put there. There's a few other henchmen. I'm going to rattle through them really quickly, because I know there's a lot of other stuff we need to talk about. So Milton Crest, as we mentioned, it's mostly just the death for me. I mean, this is the second person in the Bond franchise so far who gets inflated to death from Live and Let Die, and he gets it in this one. Really brutal. That was another moment where I was like, oh yeah, there's the 15 rating right there. Apparently the original scene was much longer with the prosthetic that they had. I think it was a lot more dragged out, and that was one where I kind of put myself in that situation, like just the claustrophobic nature of that. I don't know what it was. It was the air pressure thing. Was it to treat the bends if you've been under the water for too long? I think that's what it was for, wasn't it? But it's absolutely horrible, and like he's just cranking it up, and he's staring at him through the glass as well, Sanchez. I love that moment that he does that too. So it's more a great death for me than like that's the most memorable thing for me about the character. I do like the initial introduction though with Bond, where Bond asks for his name, and he just blanks him, and he's like, "Goodbye, like you're leaving now." So I do like that. We've got a Truman Lodge, Anthony Stark as the Sanchez's financial advisor. I always love Weasley characters like that. He reminded me of oh god, and I've forgotten the name of the actor. He played Serge in Beverly Hills Cop. But his character in True Romance.
Oh, Bronson Pinchot.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah, just like the really simpering, weaselly, sweaty kind of character. And he's great, you know, and again, his death where Sanchez just guns him down. You knew it was coming.
Yeah.
But I love that he's always banging on like, but we made this deal. We've made so much money on this deal and we need to, you know, honor the Chinese in this deal. So I loved his character too. They're all kind of bit parts, but they're all sort of memorable character actors in their own way. And that's what I like about them. And then, okay, here we go. My favorite character of this entire film. And there are some great characters in this film, but none come close to Professor Joe Butcher, the TV evangelist. I love, he felt like a Grand Theft Auto character to me. And I love zany off-the-wall characters like this. Absolutely despicable human being, just terrible through and through, sleazy as they come. What is it? The Olympitech Meditation Institute. I love the TV adverts. I love how he's playing up to the camera. The Hollywood's winning smile with like the platinum white teeth. And the bit where he leads Pam Bouvier and he says like, oh, let's step into my office. I've had it soundproofed. He just starts lying on the bed. He's just, oh, he's so great. Bless your heart. And oh, he's fantastic. He's probably one of my favorite Bond characters. And when I watched it a second time, I realized just that he's not in it as much as I remembered him being on my first viewing of the film, but he leaves such an impact. I mean, objectively, there were probably better characters in the film, but he's instantly the most just memorable one to me. I love characters like that, especially in an 80s film. So yeah, was it Wayne Newton? Yeah, and just fantastic.
I think he's great because you once, you know, when the scene starts at the beginning when they're, you know, doing all the drug stuff, and then you realize that whole system is played via him as well. Makes it really interesting. like it's what you said, Chris. GTA character, I think, is epitomized. I don't think I can probably sum it better than that now, actually. But he's so great, and one of the and then he's technically a villain. You know, whether the religion or that kind of stuff comes into it and whatnot, and then the fact that he's trying to sleep with the whole. I mean, like you said earlier, Cam, that the film is built up. She's in control of that scene, so you can never get uncomfortable watching because we know that she's playing for the awful. But the bit that sells me is when she's escaping later on. And she steals back the money. And he just, you know, you'd think 9 at the time that they're going to break character, do something stupid and get killed. But he never does. He stays in the sort of his mindset and he survives as long as I'm aware. Whether he gets arrested after, we'll never know. But he survived it all. And I think he's a lovely. It's what we love on this channel, don't we? The minor. It's like a Star Wars type thing. This guy pops up for 30 seconds, and he's one of your instant cult favorites, and he absolutely has it. I love him, and I didn't want more from him. I didn't want to see any more, but we got such a fun little moment with it. I think that's what you want.
The Pure Release music playing as well in the bedroom, like it's just yeah. Sorry, go on, Scott.
Well, I was just actually going to shout out to, two people. One you've already mentioned, but first is Everett McGill as Killifer, just because Cam and I are big Twin Peaks fans. So any chance to see Big Ed on my screen, I am all for. And the other one is Anthony Zerbay, you were talking about earlier on, who's Milton Crest. And I've only seen Anthony Zerbay in 2 films. And in both films, he dies with his face being like exploded. I just find that as a strange thing. The other film being Star Trek Insurrection, for those keeping score.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and actually Milton Crest is actually a name that's used in the Bond story, the Hildebrand Rarity, where he's the name of an entrepreneur in that story. It's one of the few like things they really hauled over from the books. But I want to also just, jumping back to Anthony Stark as Truman Lodge, I don't know if people really recognize this, but Anthony Stark played the Jimmy in the Seinfeld episode, The Jimmy. The guy who talks about himself in the third person and is like, Jimmy likes to dunk. Jimmy likes to run. That sort of thing. So that always makes me laugh. But it's a movie that I think is just really well cast in that it has these really recognizable character actors. Each one pops in the little bits they get to do. You know, like I really like Killifer as this guy who's basically killed off early in the second act. You know, I think Everett McGill has just a weird intensity to him that just it brings a role like that to life. And it makes up that I think when you see a lot of Sanchez's henchmen in this movie, a lot of them look kind of schlumpy, but I like that they work in a lot of these tough looking character actors to convince me of the danger of this guy's, group.
Yeah, I mean, some are just doing a day job, like the bit where Lupe takes off in the speedboat with like Bond dragging behind. He's like, oh, don't do that. Like, Sanchez he's just, you feel sorry for him, like he's probably going to get chastised or something. But yeah, no, great cast of characters through and through with this one. Let's talk about the music for this thing, because oh boy, I'm going to hold off for the theme. I'm just going to talk about the score for a second. So obviously Barry didn't return to this one. Living Daylights being his last one. I think he was having throat surgery during this time, so that's why he couldn't come back for this one. And we have Michael Kamen, who did the scores for Lethal Weapon and Die Hard, among many other things. Stands to reason why they'd, bring in someone like that who's proven themselves in the action genre. I think the score's tremendous to this one. I don't think it quite hits the heights of a Barry score. You can always kind of tell which ones Barry's a part of just from just the scope of them and the kind of brass flair and everything, and just how it's orchestrated. But I think it's a perfectly serviceable score. You get the Bond theme that works its way in many times in this film, and it just sounds great when it kicks in. On a second viewing, I was paying attention more to the soundtrack, and I noticed that there's sort of like a recurring theme of the wedding bell chime. Like you'll hear like the pealing of bells. That tune that you hear is worked into the score. Perfect thematic backdrop for the music right there. So yeah, as a score, I think it does the job just as well as any Barry score, but I just don't think it has that, the chef's kiss that is a John Barry score for a Bond film. But talking about like the main theme now, so apparently originally Vic Flick, who was the lead guitarist on the original Monty Norman theme for Dr. No, he and Eric Clapton were going to do the original theme, and then that didn't work out, and they pretty much just got Gladys Knight straight in after that. It utilizes the Goldfinger horn section, which apparently they had to pay royalties to the original writers for Goldfinger, which I didn't know about, so that's pretty special. This is one of my favorite Bond themes out of all of them. I think this just has it all for me, and I always say it kind of flip-flops between Duran Duran's View to a Kill or this one. If you want like the hard-hitting on the motorway, full speed ahead, you play Duran Duran, but this one to me just epitomizes everything that is Bond. It's modernized, it's 80s, which, I'm biased to in general. Gladys Knight, just absolute phenomenal talent in this film. And indeed, the end credit talent as well, which I'll talk about in a second. It's sexy, it's sultry, it epitomizes Bond. It's got the Goldfinger link as well with the horns, which kind of give it that gravitas. So it feels somewhat similar, akin to like a Shirley Bassey kind of song, I think, because it does have that brass flair to it that reminds you of Goldfinger subconsciously. But with the 80s backdrop, the build to it as well, when the tempo slows before building up to that final chorus. The song cuts out for the percussion. I can just talk to death about this song. I think it's outstanding. It's probably one of my favorites. And the end credit song as well, which I discovered about 2 weeks before we've done this review. I was getting all these recommended songs, and I saw that one on YouTube, and I thought I'll give it a listen. And I was reading the comments, and everyone was saying, "Oh, perfect end credit song for License to Kill." I didn't realize at that point that Living Daylights was the first film to introduce two songs into it, the opening one and the end credits one. I think that was the first Bond film to do it last week. And I have pretty much been listening to If You Ask Me To by Patti LaBelle on loop for the last 2 weeks. It's outstanding. Again, 80s power ballads. Just you have Gladys Knight in the intro, Patti LaBelle in the ending. And when that theme kicks in at the end, I think I always love a good soundtrack to a film, and a good soundtrack to a film can kind of elevate that film to me, or that moment, that scene. And I think that's why I love the ending to this film so much, is when you have that final exchange between Bond and Pam, and then that synth kicks in from If You Ask Me To. Just perfection. So as a soundtrack, I think it's fine, but the two themes for this one are just like head and shoulders above the rest for me.
I don't know how to follow that up as usual, because I'm not a music oriented person. I couldn't tell you anything about the soundtrack that doesn't sound anything except the fact that the opening Gun Barrel, which we spoke about, I think it's a really weak score. I don't feel like it serves the film in any way, whether I'm being too harsh or not. I think I'm just, you're in that lull personally. When John Barry goes, you're in the lull until David Arnold comes in, which obviously we'll get to Tomorrow Never Dies onwards. But at least we get a good discussion with GoldenEye, maybe for different reasons. But The themes, on the other hand, again, I've seen the film twice, right? So I didn't, obviously, 2012 would have turned it off, so I couldn't told you about the song back then. And I let the song finish. Again, I don't have any music knowledge, but the Gladys Knight theme, though, it's grown more on me, but I'm still, personally, I'm not a fan. And I know I'm in a minority of that, but it works for the title sequence. But the concept of the Gladys Knight theme, I struggle with for the Dalton era, where that's me being a bit different. But then it's the 80s, so I look at the 80s films, their themes are very more 80s oriented than compared to the newer ones, which just feels dour and depressing for what they're doing with Bond. So that's what I can probably add to the music without insulting everyone.
I think in terms of the score, I never really want to notice it too much as well, so I don't really have much to add on that point. But I'm a musician in my spare time, so I can comment on the songs, I suppose, because they do jump out to me. I'm not a big fan of the outro music. It's not one that I've ever replayed, but personally, that's just me. But the Gladys Knight song, I have to say, it's one of those Bond songs that works apart from being a Bond song. Like, you could hear it on the radio and it's fine. There's a few, like, Skyfall, I think of, that just works as a song. Live and Let Die by McCartney is just a good song in its own right. And I think License to Kill is a fantastic song that you could hear on the radio and not even necessarily associated with Bond almost, even though you would. But and that's why I keep saying that these are in my top 5. There's a lot of things in this film that are in my top 5, and this song is one of them.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the song as well. And it's when it doesn't have the best reputation, really. In some ways, it's kind of like the Dark Horse Bond song of, like, if you're into it, people are like, really? That one? Huh, I don't even remember it. It doesn't have, like, the profile, even so much as, like, they don't even credit Gladys Knight in the opening credits. And it's the only Bond song where they don't do that. It's so weird. I remember as a kid, I taped all the songs off of the VHS tapes, and I had them all on a cassette tape that I would play. And I actually colored the cassette tape gold with a gold pen. So it was nice. It was awesome. But I was so awesome in those days. But but I remember there was no internet, so I could never figure out who sang the song because it wasn't in the opening credits. So I wrote my little liner notes, but that one, it was just like blank space as to who actually did it. I'm a big fan of that song. I think it's great. And when it starts building towards, like, kind of that, 2/3 of the way through part, incredible. And I actually went to a Bond concert not too long ago where they performed a bunch of the songs, and they actually did that one. And I was genuinely surprised they chose to do that one. I'm also a big fan of the song at the end. It's sappy as hell. Yeah. I 100% understand anyone who's like, I just watched a movie where, like, a guy's head exploded, people are being fed to sharks, run through grinders, and we're ending with this.
Yeah, hell yeah.
It makes no sense tonally. I don't care. I love it, and I love the whole scene of them in the pool, set to that music. It's sappy, and I love it. Actually, the pride of my country, Celine Dion, actually did a cover of that song. So you can check that out. That's right. But as for the score, you could tell they were, like, looking for other composers, with John Barry leaving, and they were experimenting through the Moore era. You had, like, the Bill Conte score for Your Eyes Only, which is, I don't even know what it is. It's head scratching at parts. It sounds like I'm watching the Olympics or something at certain parts of the movie. But Michael Kamen is more of that experimentation, but it's an experimentation that, to me, doesn't jump out. So in some ways that actually makes it better, and that it doesn't, I don't watch it like the Conti one, just be like, I don't know what this man's thinking right now. Like, it all kind of blends into the movie. I like some of the motifs that continue throughout and carry through. I think, as you said, Chris, just the use of the Bond theme is very strong. It has actual punch to it when he uses it. Other bits and pieces, I go, that's kind of weird. But again, it's kind of like you're waiting for that David Arnold to come around and really nail what a Bond score is again. But Kamen's fine. I don't have anything against him.
Yeah, like the last, I don't have anything else to say on the score. I think it's one that I might go to and listen to sort of it on its own in isolation, but I miss those ones where they take the main theme and orchestrate it, and you have, especially in Living Daylights as well, in the third act, where that theme's playing like all guns blazing. It's just tremendous, and you don't get that one with this one. And I don't know how easy License to Kill would be to bring into like an orchestrated version in the film. So I'm kind of okay with that. I will say though, despite being one of my favorite Bond themes, which it is, it didn't quite have the impact for me when I watched it in the film. And I was trying to put my finger on what it was when I watched it the second time. And I think it's because they edit the shit out of the song. When the song first kicks in, it skips immediately to the second verse. And I think that you lose a lot of that slow build-up that you get from the first verse before it builds and builds. It is one of the longest Bond themes, though, so I understand the need to cut it down from the studio version. And also, I'm going to throw this as a really quick note in there. People probably think I'm insane. If you listen to the studio version of that song, I swear to God, when Gladys Knight sings Got a License to Kill, it sounds like she sings License to Kilt. And there's a very strong T at the end. Isn't in the film, though. So the studio version must be a different version than the one they used in the film. Random note, go and listen to the song again. More people need to listen to the song first and foremost, but listen out for License to Kill. So I'm not insane on that, trust me. Okay, that will do it for the music then. I'm conscious of time because we're trying not to break even with the film here. So I guess really just like quick fire around because I mean, it is an end of an era, I think, this film through and through. We'll talk about some of our favorite scenes. We can throw those in as well. But you do say goodbye to a lot of long-serving cast and crew members of this thing. You've got Maurice Binder, is it Binder, who did the original titles. And having seen GoldenEye now, the opening titles do feel very different. I mean, they are akin to Bond, but they are extremely different from what is kind of the norm to me at the moment, watching them in sequence. Richard Maybaum as well, who was involved in the screenplay. I don't think he was involved too heavily with this one. I think that he started to do the draft with, is it Wilson? I'm trying to think of the other
Michael
person.
G. Wilson.
That's it, yeah. And then the writer's strike happened. Not as damning as the one probably from Quantum of Solace, but it meant that Maybaum couldn't be involved with it. So I think Wilson pretty much finished the script on his own. You have Robert Brown as well as M, Caroline Bliss, who... It's not even worth mentioning her in this film, Moneypenny, really, is it? I mean, I was kind of warned about that last week. The guys from Really 007 said she's in it about 10 seconds. They probably weren't far off. She get very, very quick blink and you'll miss it role in this film. And John Glenn as well as the director, and reading, you guys' comments over the last few weeks saying that he's probably a lot of people's favorite Bond directors. After what I've seen so far, he's probably my favorite one as well. I think that he can usually balance tone very well. And to see just how versatile and how different all of his Bond films are, going back to his earliest ones, like he can do the silliest Bond films with the likes of Octopussy, for example, and then you get to this one, and even View to a Kill to Living Daylights we mentioned, it's just such completely different films. You would think that it's a completely different director, almost like a decade apart, just in terms of how they treated those films, and it was all the same director. So I got mad respect for everyone involved with it, and I'll pass over to everyone else, but Dalton's, going to be a big talking point as well, it being his last one.
Yeah, obviously the title sequence is easy to speak up GoldenEye, because I think once you hit not just the 90s, but computers, all that kind of stuff, as we get closer to the digital age, Y2K and all that stuff, I think it's the right change and what we see within those as well. The big thing for me with John Glenn is kind of, I know I had a little tangent earlier, I was sort of moaning, saying, this is for Arizona is a shit License to Kill, which I still agree with. I love this figure, and it's so pathetic. I believe there are only two directors that have directed every film in a decade that's come out for Bond, right? You've had John Glenn in the 80s, and if you already don't know this, the other answer is Sam Mendes in the 10s, but even though there was only two of them. So I always say that. I don't know, it's so irrelevant, but it's always funny to bring up because it just, make some Bond films, please. And I think he's got a really interesting legacy with his background. Sort of before he was directing, he was involved within the franchise. It was very much in that era when you could do that. Whereas we know in today's medium, an editor cannot direct the next film, and it wouldn't happen. It's career paths, all that kind of stuff. But there's always a bit of a romance with the Bond films and how they treat the crews like families and stuff. And I always really like seeing that sort of stuff, especially with obviously how the Broccoli family has been and how it's passed down over the years. So it's always really interesting, and I think it's had a tremendous impact on the franchise. And I think if you're going to go out in a film, as we said with Dalton, License to Kill is one hell of a film to go out with, and his best film is the last one he did as well, personally, which is always a great exit maneuver as well. Personally, not up there with Martin Campbell. I don't think anybody can compare to that. 2 films, 2 different Bonds, 2 first films as well. That is just incredible. I don't know how we did that still, but John Glenn is right up there with some of the Bond directors. But yeah, that was my quick thoughts on him.
For John Glenn, I mean, I would take him over a lot of other Bond directors. I'd probably take him over Sam Mendes, to be fair. But I mean, Martin Campbell always ranks highest for me when it comes to the Bond directors. It's hard to talk about. I mean, I'm going back to Richard Maybaum. Sorry, Maurice. No, actually, go back to Maurice Binder for a second. Actually, there is definitely a shift now going into GoldenEye. And you guys know that. Obviously, you've all seen it recently. And it's kind of an end of an era in that sense. But I felt like they've played their hand now. It needed its revitalization, so I like that we've kind of put this to bed. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy that that's kind of the end of it. It went out on an all-time high. Wrong film. Don't at me, folks. Sorry. I suppose I'll pivot us onto Dalton a little bit as well, because it is kind of his final film. And I kind of said it earlier, and I suppose I'll just repeat it in a sense. I'm glad he went out on his From Russia with Love instead of his Diamonds Are Forever.
Yeah.
I might have liked to have seen Goldfinger in his take, you know. And there's a great book by Mark Edlitz, The Lost Adventures of James Bond, where he actually chronicled the stories that were actually in place for the 3rd and 4th Dalton films, and that's a really fascinating read. I'd recommend anyone check it out. Great read. But yeah, at least he went out on his From Russia with Love.
I think it's interesting to look at the legacy of the Robert Brown and Carolyn Bliss, where it's I don't know that they ever figured out how to use those characters in the Dalton era. It's they almost would have been better maybe losing Moneypenny. I don't know, because I think when you have a character like that, the audience wants to know something about this personality and how it, jives off a Bond. But it's very clear they have no interest in doing that. And I don't think it fits well with the Dalton aesthetic of what he wants to do. And Robert Brown, he feels just kind of like an exposition machine, and they never really nail down the tone of who this character is the way they do with Bernard Lee or with, going forward, Judi Dench. It always felt like the MI6 department was always a little underutilized and maybe not thought through as well with the Dalton era. But I have nothing against either one of them. They're fine. Just wish they'd gotten something more interesting to do so that when we say it's the end of their era, what do we have to say, really? Right? Yeah. You're like, well, okay, well, fair enough. I do think it's weird that M is introduced petting a cat ominously. It's what? Is this supposed to be some sort of weird Blofeld reference? I don't understand what's going on here. But
yeah, I wish I could say more on Caroline Bliss, because we had a lot of people commenting about her in the previous one. There's the extent of what we know about her is that she has a collection of Barry Manilow records, apparently. And that's it. That's all we know about her take on Moneypenny. So I have now seen the next Moneypenny. So I'm hoping that she sticks around a little bit longer than Caroline Bliss does, which I'm really hoping she does. I'll find out in the next few weeks. But yeah, it definitely feels like an end of an era Bond film. And not just that, it feels like an end of an era for the 80s as well, it being 1989. I think that's why I love the ending so much, that it is just that last pang of that 80s spirit and, going into that synth song. I miss films like that. I miss the sound. I miss the aesthetic, and just, I can't describe it with the 80s, the feeling I get when I watch a film from that decade or hear music from that decade. And then the 90s was a whole different animal. And GoldenEye is a whole different animal, which we'll be talking about next week. So I guess we can move on to favorite scenes now really quickly. I'm probably just going to pick one. Actually, I'll pick two. The entire third act with the trucks, outstanding. My Christ, it's just fantastic. Everything in camera as well. It really makes a difference. Just all the explosions going 10 to the dozen. Dalton actually getting on top of the truck as well. Very important, as we mentioned, him doing the majority of his own stunts as well is always appreciated. I didn't know what the third act for this film was going to be. I knew nothing about this film going into it and didn't know it was going to end up this way. And, it might not be as glamorous, say, as, like a high octane plane chase or a bomb on a plane like the previous film, but it's still a hell of a third act. And George, I know that we're going to disagree here. I love the wheelie through the fire. I think it's epic. It kicks in. It's stupid. You wouldn't be able to do that in a truck. I'm fine with it. I love that shot of just the wheelie through the fire. Bond's the only guy who's going to get through that fire. Truck slams down and he carries on driving. But the one that impressed me more, I feel like they opened with the headliner and then kind of followed it with the opening act, but I found the other truck stunt way more impressive that they did, where it's the articulated lorry and it's driving on its side and then it crushes the car. So if they opened with that, which was phenomenal, and then they followed it up with a wheelie, which I didn't think quite had the same impact as the previous stunt, but that's probably my favorite scene in the film, just all of that. And then, as I mentioned, the ending, why didn't you wait until you were asked? So why don't you ask me? Just perfect. So they're my two favorite scenes in the film, probably.
I love the whole ending. Not going to go, not the ending, sorry, the final act, the from the moment the fire starts with Dario to that whole stuff. Great way. You've built up to that so well, building up to Sanchez, the villain, seeing him losing everything, his empire crumbling. I love that kind of thing. They do it so well, and it feels like it stands alone. And a bit biased when I was younger, I used to work at a petrol station as well. So not that I wanted to see some fuel tankers explode, but it's like that. Like to do those stunts is remarkable. We know the Bond film does those stunts, so that was always something big with me. But my favorite scenes, something I don't really explain much, but the assassination attempts up until the ninjas turn up. I love that whole build up. He knows he needs to blow the window, then take the shot. That is a hitman doing a kill. That is James Bond. That is Dalton's James Bond, and I couldn't see more doing that. I could see Connor, I could see Craig, but the way in which you start to clock it, they tease it a bit earlier that he's trying to figure out how he's going to go about doing the assassination. I love that kind of stuff. It's not things we get a lot in Bond, and it's because it is him. It's his cold-blooded nature that we haven't had a lot of, and I absolutely love that. That's one of my favorite scenes. Once the ninjas come in for a couple of minutes, it just deviates ever so slightly and it just gets a bit weird, and they die anyway, so it's kind of pointless.
So much happened in 2 minutes in that part of the film. I looked away and there was ninjas on the screen. What's happened? I've put a different film on.
My favorite part, apart from the ones that have already been mentioned, would probably be my first choice. But apart from those, would be actually a scene that preceded George's scene, where you have Bond in the casino, and then goes up to the office to meet, Sanchez's character, and you get not my famous one line. Not the one I'm picking, but you get the actual, I'm a problem eliminator.
Yeah.
That line is pretty good. I haven't seen a trailer for this film, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was in the trailer.
I need to find another number one quote now. Thanks for that.
I should have delivered it properly. Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Favorite scenes. I mean, a lot of them have been named. It's the truck chase. It's like the big memorable moments in the movie. But I want to just, again, express my love of a massacre in an aquarium, where it's like, how many ways can people die horribly via fish, eels, and maybe the worst of all, the stealth worst, the guy in the maggot drawer.
The genetically mutilated maggots. Yeah.
Oh, God, that has to be the worst. That might be one of the worst deaths in any Bond movie. At least Dario threw the blades relatively quick. That guy may be getting eaten for weeks.
Oh, yeah. I never even thought of that.
He gets sealed as well. He says sorry to jump in next part. He says a great one-liner after, doesn't he? I can't remember what he says, though.
I don't have that one down. I was still reeling from the electric eel. I was like, I don't think that's how electric eels work, but it's fine.
And it's also not moving, that eel.
Yeah. Oh boy. We're talking about one-liners and stuff. Should we get on to our one-liners and stuff? So one has been mentioned, the problem eliminator. Awesome. That would probably be my number one. Yeah. What else did I have written down for this thing? Looks like he came to a dead end. I'm going to mention that one. If Moore had said that line, that would probably be my number one for that week. It's awkward when Dalton says lines like that, and I don't like it. So that's bottom of the barrel for me, that line. Switch the bloody machine off. That was a mention. That made me laugh. There's a moment in there, and I showed George this clip, so I want people to go and watch this scene and see if I'm way off base in this. There's an exchange between Sanchez and Bond delivers a line, and he goes proper northern with it. He sounds like Sean Bean. He sounds like he's from Sheffield. And he says, you were just in time. Things were about to turn nasty. And I swear to God, watch that scene. It's the most northern you'll ever hear Timothy Dalton, and I don't know why he does that, but it's great. I think that's pretty much. Oh, I had this one as well, which Sanchez delivers. When you're up to your ankles, you're going to beg to tell me everything. When you're up to your knees, you'll kiss my ass to kill you, which is not a great line, but it's also great in its own way. But my number one would be Problem Eliminator. I mean, it's just, if you're going to epitomize Dalton in one line, it's not going to be a quippy one. It's going to be, I'm going to fucking kill you line. And that's exactly what it is.
I personally think sort of Dalton's films, you don't get many one-liners, and I think in this film they designate them to the villains, to other characters, which I think benefits him. But the Problem Eliminator is my favorite. It's the delivery, it's the fact he's like uncomfortably in the tux, and he's got that, you know what we mentioned last week, Chris, like he kind of has this like smile.
Oh, the Grinch smile,
like, yeah, he's got the Grinch thing.
Smile.
It's the way he delivers it's like he leans on the Eliminator. Like his scenes with Sanchez are great, but that being one, the problem is, I'm going to say to people who haven't clocked it, watched Goldeneye yesterday at the cinema, and the first hour is just like one-liners, like zap, 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 zap from Brosnan. So I'm really struggling with License to Kill one-liners, but Problem Eliminator is always been my favorite one from this film. And I love the Dario Honeyme, not the line, just his delivery of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would have also picked the Eliminator, but I pick a Stealth Sanchez one I quite liked. And it's just after he blew up Milton Crest's face all over the money. And his henchman goes, "What about the money, patron?" And he just takes a beat and goes, "Launder it." Yeah. It's like, yeah. What a badass.
That one is amazing. I also love Felix screaming, "I'll see you in hell." Like, that is an 80s line if ever there was one. There's another moment that's like, it's not a good line, but it is a moment that I love because it's Dalton theatricality sneaking in. Because a lot of time he clamps that down, but every now and again the theater kid in Dalton bursts forth, and it's where Pam Bouvier is saying, you know, "What if you were my secretary?" And he lets out this like cheesy laugh, and he's like, "We're south of the border. It's a man's world." It's like, what? It's crazy.
Also, I swear, like the last thing that I'll say just on the film itself before giving final thoughts on the legacy of it. Felix just seems really happy at the end of this film, and I don't think the gravity of the situation's really settled with him. I'm like, you've had your leg chewed off by a shark, and you're now a widow. Like on the day of your wedding, like has that settled it? I don't know. It's just weird to me to see him so happy and jovial at the end. Yeah, it's just that's probably a negative, I'd say, just at the end of the film, but.
I've always assumed it was morphine or something like that.
Yeah, probably.
I wonder if it was like a note. They're like, maybe it was like, well, we have to show Felix is alive because all we've seen is him in a hospital bed. But it's like you don't want to cut to him and have a scene of him depressed, staring off in the distance.
So I wanted that. That's how I'd do it if I was directing this film. Maybe he's like Austin Powers. Maybe he's like, wait a tick, that means I'm single again. Maybe he's playing the field. Who knows?
Lupe. Yeah.
I guess just real quick then, final thoughts on this is sort of like the end of the Dalton era. I didn't know anything about Dalton going into last week. So as I mentioned, I felt that gave me a taste, and everyone kept saying License to Kill is the one where, you know, Dalton just nails it through and through. And having seen this film now, I absolutely agree with it. It's going to be a very interesting thing ranking all the Bonds at the end of it, because we always keep saying, can you rank Dalton having only done 2? I think the 2 films that he did are vastly different. I think if you want the more archetypal Bond film with Dalton in it, watch The Living Daylights, because I think that feels more like a Bond film. But this is going to be a film that I come back to many, many times, just because it feels so standalone. I appreciate it for, you know, pushing the boundaries with what it could do. The increased age rating, the more violent Bond and the more serious Bond, I think really works for Dalton. I do wish we'd have got more of these films with him, but I think, you know, to retire on this film, and I think it's just a beautiful ending as well. Like I keep going on about that final scene, but that is just a beautiful sort of like off into the sunset kind of ending for me, for Dalton. And for the 80s as well. So it brings a curtain on 80s Bond to a close. And yeah, I thought it was just tremendous. An amazing film. I understand the hype for it. And hopefully more people sort of gravitate towards this one as the years goes on. I know it's had a bit of a resurgence over the years from initially when it came out. But yeah, just brilliant writing, beautiful storytelling, simple storytelling, but so effective in its characters, I thought.
Yeah, it's a solid, you can look at this from a Bond film and an action film. I think it delivers on both points of those. I think it has enough from what you want from a Bond film, and it has enough from that action film as well, that you could watch either of them if you're doing a set of action films or a set of Bond films. I think it works for either, which is very rare for the Bond films to be able to say that as well, because none of the other ones can, me being absolutely honest. But the big thing I'll say, I kind of said this into the Moore era, is that I've always stripped James Bond back to 3 eras. You've got Dr. No up till View to a Kill, and then you've got this second era, which is the Dalton and Brosnan era, where I feel like they're modernizing, they're tinkering, they're trying to do new things, they're trying to divert away and try and find what's working for them. And then we get the Craig era, which is the sort of the post 9/11 world, the sequential ones where this is a continuation of the story and the characters. And it's really interesting when we get to this, knowing that we know there's going to be a 6-year gap. No one else does in 1989. No one knows what's going to come next, what's going to happen. There wouldn't be another Dalton film. So it's really interesting to look at from different perspectives. And sort of Dalton as Bond, he is a very interesting Bond, because I think he's not known by the general public. He gets sort of thrown into the Lazenby section by sort of, I'd say, like cinema goers, that, oh, we did 2. Well, why would I watch them, right? A lot of them would say that. People have said that. Why wouldn't I watch the ones where there's 4 or there's 5 or stuff like that? And he doesn't get very often put in the same sentence, being honest. I think public opinion, the top 3 is more Connery, Brosnan. Those 3 personally, I believe, are in that level of general public, not necessarily fans. And again, they will have the quantity of so many more films for people to look at, and they had more of an era. But Dalton's is essentially 2 years, 87 and 89. And then it's gone. It's a flash and gone. It's not like there's a new Bond in 91. The franchise drops off. It doesn't come back till the mid-90s with a bang, a hell of a bang. And I kind of love the fact that License to Kill was the last film we get before that. That if you're going to take a 6-year gap, give us a License to Kill, not Spectre. Give us something that's this throwing everything at it to do something different, to do something new. And I think that benefits the film, the production, and as one of you guys mentioned earlier, I just forgot which one, the long term of, without doing this, we don't think they can go for the Craig films and let them be the success they are. So it's a really fascinating one. It's definitely a top tier Bond film, right up there. There's a linchpin of probably, I think there's probably a clear 6 or 7 that are way above the rest. And I think it sits in there very nicely, and it was fun to rewatch. And I think I'll be seeing this one a little bit more often outside of the normal Bond marathons.
It's weird to think that there's a hidden gem in the Bond films, as if people haven't watched them all. But this is the one where I just don't think there's people watching it, and it's such a sleeper hit. It's, again, I agree, it's top 5 for me, probably top 10 for a lot of people if you actually watch them all. But people just dismiss it, along with the Lazenby, especially the cinema-going audience, the general people. And I think this is the one you should be checking out to get an idea of how we got from Moore to Craig. He is that bridge. I don't think Brosnan was that bridge. Maybe at times he was starting to move there, but Dalton is the one that really, he fell on the sword so we could get to Casino Royale.
Yeah.
And so I will always go back to this film as something that is an enjoyable 80s action film with one of my favorite characters of all time.
Well, I think one of the things that really helped the legacy of this movie was the success of the Daniel Craig films, because people who turned in for those Daniel Craig ones and really loved them, it was kind of like, what other Bond movies should I watch? I really love these Daniel Craig ones. And it was like, well, Moonraker, obviously. There's not a lot of options that fit well. You can point really towards maybe a From Russia with Love, but I think License to Kill is a really strong one for people to follow up on. And I think it's because of the success of those Daniel Craig ones that this Dalton era has gotten much more of a reappraisal. And License to Kill, like, I enjoyed it when I first saw it a lot, and it was one that got kicked around for a long time. I mean, I still see people will start picking on it as just a kind of a generic 80s action movie. I don't know. Bond has always been about, trend hopping. They're doing space for Moonraker. They're doing, martial arts for Man with the Golden Gun. They'll hop wherever the trends are going. So I have nothing against doing 80s action movies. They're doing different things. They did shared universe, basically, kind of with, Spectre, the whole Marvel kind of concept. So who knows what they'll do in No Time to Die, but they're always jumping on what's popular. To me, this one just really is, I don't know if it's top 5 for me. I'd have to sit there and actually write a list out. I think it's more like a top 10, but edging towards the the 5 mark than say number 10. But it's one that like it has so many strengths about it that I know I'm going to keep going back to and finding new things in. Whereas some of the ones that I really enjoy, you kind of know the experience you're getting every single time. Mm-hmm. I don't know that watching License to Kill in the past, I had focused as much on the whole loyalty concept as I did this time. The fact that this movie that I've seen probably, 10 or 12 times or something, continues to give me something new each time I visit it. That's the strength of or that's the sign of a movie that with a lot of strengths to it. And so I think it's a pretty great Bond film.
Absolutely, and it's just nice that we were so like positive about this one, and just like the flashback of when we were all done talking about Man with a Golden Gun, and we were all defeated and just wanted it to be over. But no, this has been great, and this is pre-recorded. I'm sure people have been commenting along, but if you are discovering this after live stream after this is premiered, let us know your thoughts on License to Kill. I think we have actually cleared the run of the movie. We're trying to avoid that, but it happens. It's fine. At least it's not 3 hours this time. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, all of that good stuff. George, next week, I know you've been waiting 17 weeks. We're finally arrived at Brosnan. You've been crossing it off every single day like a tally, haven't you, to get to this day?
The era begins Tuesday the 10th of August, and what's more exciting is that we said we'll reveal who's on it, and it's Scott and Cam coming on below. We're gonna have the SpyHards on our GoldenEye review, which I'm very excited for, and we'll get into it on the video. We won't give away what the connection is, but for those that haven't checked out their channel, if you can find out the correlation between those guys coming on our GoldenEye video and when we do ours, that's something I want you to try and do a bit of homework on. If you want to do your homework as well, of course, here's some of that Linktree. We're going to discover Linktree. We need to use it because every link you need is on Linktree. We're going to put it in the description below. It has links to the Facebook, to the streaming websites you can listen to them on and everything. It would save about 30 seconds of video for everyone. So maybe we'll get our own Linktree page, but check it out in the description. They've done a couple of Bond ones already, and they have covered GoldenEye. So I've got my own research to do, but yes, we've all seen it recently. Apologies, Cam, you couldn't join us from Canada for the Prince Charles yesterday, but I'm excited to get you guys on for that one, and I'm going to try my hardest to not get past the runtime, but someone's going to have to restrain me because Brosnan is here, and that one-liner section is going to be through the roof.
Yeah.
But as I said again, I want to thank you guys for both coming on. It's been great to get you back on. It's been an incredible chat. It's very late here, pre-recording. If you guys are down at home, it's nearer 1 o'clock now than midnight. God. So it's been a great discussion time. I'm glad to get you both on. And if you want to talk about what's coming up next on the channel, what's just come out, just in case people want to check that out as well.
Sure. I mean, the week that this episode drops, we will be dropping our episode on Taken 2, the Liam Neeson film, and we're trying to figure out just how bad of a parent Liam Neeson truly is to lose his family once again. But we're also moving into our 1-year anniversary the following week, and we are basically going to be covering 1998's The Avengers to celebrate. That's one way of celebrating, at least anyway. We are masochists after all. And we've got an interview with the director. We've got an interview with the writer for the film. We're trying to get to the bottom of what happened. And I think by the end of the week, there's 3 episodes for it. I think we get to the bottom of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the...
go ahead.
I can't wait for the younger kids to come on and say, but the Avengers came out in 2012.
Yeah.
No, we prayed for that movie while we were watching the Avengers.
I hope your listeners assemble and listen to the.
Can I change my one-liner of the week?
Yeah. I stole yours earlier, so it mainly makes sense.
No, that's absolutely awesome. So, as I mentioned, links in the description below. Please go check them out. And we'll be back next week to chat some Brosnan. It's going to happen. We have all seen it, and I'm hyped to talk about it. That will do it for the Dalton era, though, before moving into next week. This has been great. Thank you to everyone who's hopefully been watching during this thing. And until next time, we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, everyone.